Chapter 238. Andre couldn't believe that the terrifying old monster in front of him had taught so many terrifying disciples. Putting aside the half-elven Archmage Orlando Watts, who was only half a step away from becoming a legendary mage, the mastermind behind the scenes alone was enough to send chills down one's spine. As for the black-robed man lying on the ground as a corpse, he would be able to cause huge waves in human society. As long as he acted fast enough, he would have no problem conquering a few large cities and becoming a tyrant. Of course, he probably didn't have such an opportunity now. His corpse was already cold, and he had a serious psychological defect. Even if he became a leader, he wouldn't be able to maintain it for long. Sooner or later, he would be overthrown by his enraged subordinates. No, I don't have the slightest interest in controlling those backward and ignorant cities. I just want to add some variables and observe the changes. You can think of it as a game. The apprentices can do whatever they want, and I'm in charge of increasing the difficulty. For example, this guy you killed. He was especially eager to obtain unparalleled power in a short period of time. So I told him that a powerful creature from the Shadow Plane was sealed here. How about it? Isn't it interesting? As he spoke, a hint of mischief appeared on the Lich's skeletal face. It wasn't clear whether he was mocking the black-robed man's stupidity or mocking him for overestimating himself. So that's how it is. The life and death battles that we go through are nothing but a show in your eyes, something to pass the time. Having said that, Andre laughed self-deprecatingly and shook his head. Although he'd already made his own judgments about the series of events that had happened in Linton City in the past few months, it was only when he uncovered the truth that he discovered that everything was a playground for a terrifying lich. He had laid down a huge net 1,000 years ago, and could even manipulate the churches of the gods through certain means. Perhaps there were countless apprentices hidden in the Green Sea Alliance who were preparing to undergo trials, using heaven and earth as a chessboard, using all life as chess pieces, making all mortals struggle with all their might without realizing it, and acting out the parting of life and death. Andre had thought that these were the privileges of the gods, but this lich emitting terrifying power had done it too. He used mysterious means to hide behind the scenes and control the situation in the south. As long as he wanted, he could make any city disappear from the map completely. It was indescribably terrifying. That kind of strength was enough to make any arrogant genius feel despair. Compared to a mage who had survived the Third Magic Recession, Ulysses the Necromancer and Boris, the president of the Magic Association of Lincoln City, were as weak as babies. The lich seemed to have noticed the change in Andre's emotions. He let out a low and hoarse laugh. He, you seem to have guessed a little of the truth. Not bad. You are much more talented than my previous apprentices. To be precise, you have a creative mind. One had to know that on the path of arcane mages, it was impossible to reach the pinnacle of mages if one simply followed the footsteps of their predecessors. This was because the path to becoming a legend was never repeated. Everyone's understanding of arcane magic and magical energy was different. It was a special feeling that couldn't be described. It was like breathing. You were so familiar with it, but you couldn't find a suitable adjective to describe it. I said these words to Orlando Watts more than 2,000 years ago. Unfortunately, his personality was too rigid. He was always unwilling to break those rules and regulations. In the end, he could only stay at level 19 and never take that step forward. At this point, he sighed regretfully, as if he was feeling sorry for his apprentice. However, this emotion didn't last long. After only a few seconds, the lich returned to normal. He raised his bony arm and stretched out 2 fingers. You asked 2 questions just now. I think it's my turn now, isn't it? Of course. Please ask. Andre bowed slightly and made a gesture of invitation. From the conversation just now, he could almost confirm that the lich in front of him was the legendary mage who had the power to tear the earth and destroy cities, especially the dark golden bones all over his body, which contained a huge amount of magical energy. Even from so far away, he could still feel it clearly. There was a saying, life is like rape. Since you can't resist, you might as well lie down and enjoy it. Andre wasn't arrogant enough to think that he was a match for a legendary mage, not to mention a lich in the form of an undead that couldn't be killed. Moreover, the lich had been very friendly so far. He didn't show any hostility, nor did he seem to have any ulterior motives. He looked like a harmless uncle next door. There was no need to be so nervous. After all, as a smart person, he didn't want to make an enemy that he couldn't defeat. First question, tell me where you're from. Second question, tell me who your mentor is. The lich bluntly pointed out the secret that Andre had been trying to hide since he came to the south. I'm from the Canteru Kingdom in the far north. As for my mentor, Ulysses Domer can be considered as one. Andre gave an honest answer. However, he was very careful to avoid the fact that he was actually in the form of a soul that had transmigrated from another world. Oh, so it's that little fella who was famous in the north a few hundred years ago. The lich revealed an expression of sudden realization. Although it sounded frighteningly arrogant to call the infamous necromancer a little fellow, it was undeniable that he was qualified to do so as a lich and legendary mage who had lived for thousands of years. When the gods joined forces to destroy the ancient magic civilization, there were very few survivors who escaped. Some legendary mages even used themselves as a resonance point and chose to perish together with the gods. There were 15 gods who fell in that battle, and they hadn't been resurrected until now. This showed how tragic it was. According to the estimates of scholars, there were no more than 10 survivors. It was obvious that the legendary mages who stood at the top of the arcane path had the power to hurt the gods. In particular, the legendary arcane spells that surpassed level 9 arcane spells were far beyond imagination. It was said that they could even control the climate, create volcanoes, tsunamis, summon huge meteorites to crash into the ground, instantly kill a city of people, and then turn them into undead. Some could even create magical black holes that even the technology on Earth couldn't do, sucking everything in and throwing it to an unknown corner of the universe. Chapter 239. In short, none of these fellows who wielded destructive power were easy to deal with. Even the gods turned a blind eye to them as long as they didn't go too far. This kind of indulgence became more and more severe after the god of gods forbade the gods from entering the world of mortals. Andre believed that there must be many gods who knew that this old lich had been controlling the situation in the south, but they all turned a blind eye to it. First, he didn't kill the followers of the gods, and second, he didn't obstruct the preaching. Finally, after so many years, the cities in the south had always maintained stability and development. Although he often played a little game with his disciples and occasionally caused some destruction and casualties, it was still tolerable. Of course, this could also be a helpless action. After all, in a situation where the gods couldn't descend, the legendary masters were the top fighting force in the whole continent. It was simply a fool's dream to want to capture or kill them. The only people in the church who could fight against them were the legendary priests and the chosen ones. Although the former was a little weaker than the legendary masters, they had the support of the church behind them. The latter had the divinity bestowed by the gods, which was the most essential thing of a god. As long as the mortals received it, they would instantly receive countless benefits, such as immortality, endless lifespan, no need to sleep, enhanced understanding, the ability to survive in harsh environments, and the ability to not eat or drink for a short period of time, etc. With these castrated versions of the gods' abilities, they could also be on par with the legendary masters. To a certain extent, the relationship between the Church of the Gods and the legendary masters was a mutual restriction. No one dared to easily break the delicate balance, especially the churches that had to take care of the casualties of their followers. How would they dare to casually start a war? As for the legendary masters, due to unknown reasons, they gradually faded out of people's sight, especially in the last few hundred years. There was rarely any news about them, and even books didn't have any records of them. As a conspiracy theorist, Andre felt that there must be a hidden secret. Now that a legendary lich had appeared in front of him, how could he not ask clearly? Thinking of this, he took a deep breath and asked very seriously, "Master, may I ask why you chose to hide behind the scenes? Is there a reason for this?" Reason? The Lich's eyes flashed a cold light slightly. Haha, you guessed right, young man. There's indeed a special reason for us old fellows to suddenly disappear, but I'm sorry, you don't deserve to know yet. To be precise, knowing too early wouldn't do you any good. That doesn't count. Ask another question. Andre obviously didn't expect the other party to directly refuse to answer his question, which made him keenly aware of a trace of unusual meaning. Although he was eager to unveil the layers of mysteries that shrouded Oriar, he knew that if he did not have enough strength, he would be courting death. It was like a small fish suddenly swimming into the middle of a group of great white sharks. If it was not careful, it might be swallowed in one bite without any room to resist. Obviously, the disappearance of the legendary mages from the sight of ordinary people probably involved some powerful forces. It was even possible that the gods had personally intervened. Only the legendary mages would know the reason. Since he couldn't get the answer he wanted, Andre could only shrug his shoulders helplessly. All right, then I'll change the question. Who is that apprentice of yours that's causing so much trouble in Linton City? Why did he start a war and summon demons? In fact, he had always been very interested in this mastermind behind the scenes. He had planned to ask the next question, since this person was very likely to be his greatest opponent in Linton City. However, he still didn't know whether this person was a man or a woman, what their name was, how old they were, what their personality was, and what their sphere of influence was. I was just wondering when you had asked this question, and now you've finally asked. It's incredible that you can remain so calm at your age. It's no wonder that my apprentice has such a headache. But before I answer this question, I have a suggestion. I wonder if you're interested? A hint of playfulness appeared on the Lich's skeletal face as he spoke. Andre sighed helplessly and said in a self-deprecating tone, "Suggestion? I think you want me to compete with him to see who's more outstanding, right?" The Lich laughed and nodded. That's right. Two young mages who are equally intelligent and good at thinking, using the resources at hand to test each other, fighting openly and covertly, fully displaying their strengths, and finally defeating each other. Just thinking about it makes me excited. Of course, there's still a certain gap between you and him, whether it's in terms of power or spellcasting level. But that's fine. I can do something to restore the balance of the situation. What about the rules? Since it's a game, there must be rules. For example, the duration, how to win, what benefits can I gain from it, and so on. Andre was very clear that he didn't have the qualifications to refuse, so he might as well settle for the next best thing. First, he would set up a rule that was more beneficial to himself. This way, he could increase his chances of winning. As for the other aspects, he would take it one step at a time. With the sudden appearance of this big boss behind the scenes, he had a feeling that the situation was suddenly out of control. Thus, he desperately wanted to find a sense of security or at least gain some initiative. The legendary Lich, who had lived for thousands of years, had a clear understanding of human nature. He didn't even need to use any spells to see through Andre's thoughts. However, he didn't expose him. Instead, he raised his finger and pointed in the air. In an instant, ripples appeared in the surrounding air, and after a few seconds, a three-dimensional image of the Green Sea Alliance's sphere of influence slowly appeared. Even the surrounding islands and sea routes were marked out. It could be said to be extremely exquisite. The Lich didn't waste any time. He used his finger to draw a circle on it, including Lincoln City, the Sardinia Islands, Bakarov City, Nepali City, and Gerda City where the Alliance Council was located. Even the large, uncivilized islands in the south were no exception. It had to be said that this area was a little too large. Even if one were to ride a fast horse day and night, it would take at least a month or two to cover it. More importantly, apart from Lincoln City, Andre knew too little about the other cities and islands. He didn't even know the specifics. Chapter 240. The Lich pointed at the area and said, "Do you see that? This is the battlefield where you will fight. From the land to the sea, to the island, and even the sky. Lie, cheat, kill, plunder, you could do anything. The time limit is 2 years. Prepare this year, and the final battle next year. As for winning or losing, it is very simple. Defeat or kill the opponent. Since your mage level is relatively low, I will give you a special privilege. If you find that you are no match for the opponent, you can choose to surrender. Finally, there are benefits. If you lose, I will give you a magic item. If you win, I will give you a book called Encyclopedia of Magic Potions. There are hundreds of lost potion formulas recorded in it. One of them is the elixir of immortality that your mentor Ulysses is researching. To be precise, its original name should be Sweet Rebirth. It is an alchemy poison that is used in the ritual of transforming a mortal into a lich. Sorry, I am afraid that my mentor no longer needs this potion. I have already used some gadgets to blow him into pieces. Andre spread out his hands expressionlessly. Oh, you actually killed your own mentor? Unbelievable. The two cold lights in the lich's eyes suddenly exploded, and then he began to dance and laugh. Ha 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 ha. Too interesting. Too interesting. Who would have thought that in this era of magic decline, there would be an acolyte who would follow the ancient tradition and kill his own mentor? Young man, I'm more and more satisfied with you now. Ancient tradition. Andre was confused. He did not understand why the lich was so excited. The reason why he said this was mainly because he was not very satisfied with the reward. The Encyclopedia of Magic Potions was not bad, but it was not very helpful in increasing a mage's level. Thus, he wanted to change it. Yes, an ancient tradition. In the most prosperous era of human magic, the legendary mages continuously tortured their acolytes to ensure that they would not become useless in a comfortable environment. This made them develop a strong hatred in their hearts, and even encouraged them to kill themselves. That's because only apprentices nurtured in this way have the potential to become legendary mages. It can be said that every legendary mage yearns for their apprentices to kill them, because it's a way to surpass and continue civilization. At this point, the lich seemed to be lost in his memories. It took him a full minute to regain consciousness. He pointed at the black-robed man's corpse and asked, "Do you know why I tortured him and gave him power?" Andre sighed and replied, "To stimulate the hatred hidden in his heart." The lich nodded lightly. "That's right, but he disappointed me. From the beginning to the end, he didn't have the slightest bit of courage. He only knew how to beg for mercy and silently endure everything. I don't need such an acolyte. On the contrary, I would rather have an acolyte like you who dares to kill your own teacher. Do you know how much I envy that little fellow Ulysses? However, it's a pity that geniuses are always exceptionally difficult to control and teach. He clearly doesn't possess this ability. You want to be killed by your own apprentice?" Andre asked tentatively. As a transmigrator, he could not understand such a contradictory relationship. According to what the lich said, all legendary mages use some kind of cruel method to train their acolytes, encouraging them to rebel against them. They let the acolytes learn from their failures, making them cruel, cunning, and treacherous. They also learned how to make the most of their advantages. In the end, they would kill their own teachers, and the teachers would gladly accept this outcome. Perhaps in the eyes of the legendary mages, the fact that the acolytes could kill their own teachers proved that each generation was stronger than the previous. However, they did not notice the huge internal friction in this process. How much money and time would it take to cultivate a powerful mage? Anywhere from 10 to 40 to 50 years. And this was not even taking into account the terrifying death rate of the acolytes. It was said that in that era, out of every 100 acolytes, only 5 would live to graduate. The death rate of the legendary mage's acolytes was even higher, not even 1%. The reason was just like what the lich in front of him was doing. He always used all kinds of methods and trials to torture his acolytes, trying to make them struggle in an extremely difficult environment, grow, and finally surpass him and kill him. It had to be said that this method was a little perverted. It was no wonder that the mages of the modern era had the habit of treating their acolytes not as humans. It seemed like it was a leftover poison from that era. In our era, every mage with an acolyte yearned for this, and of course, I am no exception. If such a genius appears in the path of my teaching, then I will gladly accept my own death. The lich raised his chin slightly, speaking very arrogantly. Looking at the lich's incomparably serious expression, Andre suddenly felt that the universal values of Earth did not seem to apply to the Orier. To be precise, it did not apply to the group of people who held the most power in Orier. They followed another kind of naked law of the jungle, and that was the survival of the fittest, the survival of the fittest, the survival of the fittest. Whoever had the most power could set the rules and speak loudly. Talking to them about human rights, freedom, and democracy was simply a joke. How could a legendary mage who could flatten a mountain with a raise of his hand be equal to a lowly slave? Obviously, this was simply impossible. There was a good saying, class had never been eliminated. Even in the 21st century of Earth, there were still many privileged classes. It was just that their methods were more subtle and their style was gentler. They also knew how to manipulate the media to beautify themselves, making them appear no different from ordinary people. But understanding was one thing, and Andre's worldview, outlook on life, and values had long been fixed. He could not accept the concept of seeing his own kind as livestock, and so he quickly changed the topic. All right, I accept this game. You can now tell me the name of your acolyte. Who is he? The Lich smiled and stretched out a finger that was only left with bones, gently waving it in front of his eyes. Don't be hasty, child. Don't be hasty. When you return to Linton City, he will personally send you an invitation, and the two of you will naturally meet then. I will restrict him from taking the initiative to attack for a year, and you'll have to do your best to accumulate power during this time. Of course, if you feel that you are ready, you can attack in advance. Remember, when you attack, it is the end of the preparation period, so please think carefully before making a decision. Chapter 241. Andre nodded thoughtfully and asked, in that case, all I have to do is to wait for his invitation? Yes, I'll inform him as soon as possible. Also, I promise to give you some help to make this game fairer. So, take this and hang it in a conspicuous place. You'll soon find that this little toy can bring you unparalleled luck. Also, this encyclopedia of magic potions will be a gift for killing your mentor. I'll choose another reward for your victory. Goodbye. As soon as his voice fell, the Lich's figure suddenly became blurry and completely disappeared a second later. Looking at the huge book in his hand that was half a meter long, 30 centimeters wide, 15 centimeters thick, and weighing dozens of kilograms, Andre didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't expect the Lich to leave without any hesitation. After all, he still had many questions to ask, especially what kind of monster was sealed in this underground maze that could massacre an entire dwarven city. But now, he didn't have the chance. He would probably have to wait until this game was over before he could appear again, and that would have to wait at least a year. As a smart person, Andre knew that if he couldn't figure out something, he should put it aside for now. He quickly turned his attention to the thick book in his hand. The words Encyclopedia of Magic Potions were written in the ancient common language. Although the rhetoric was slightly different from the modern common language, it wasn't difficult to understand the meaning of the words. Because now wasn't the time to read, he quickly opened his backpack and used all his strength to shove the book inside. Apart from the book, the Lich also left behind a gold coin. It was different from the design on the gold coin of Linton City. The surface of this gold coin was as smooth as a mirror, but under the sunlight, it reflected dark lines like a spider's web. There was even a spider in the middle of the web, which looked like the symbol of some secret society. Obviously, it was a symbol of status. As long as it was worn in a conspicuous place, people would naturally come knocking on the door. Andre directly used a magic trick to fasten the gold coin on the first button of his robe. This position was rather conspicuous, and anyone who wasn't blind would definitely be able to see it. After doing all this, he finally had some time to flip through the apprentice's notebook so that he could gather all the information as soon as possible and complete the system's mission. Since he skipped the difficult part of the magic knowledge in the notes, his reading speed was much faster. In just a few minutes, he had finished reading the contents, especially the last few pages, which repeatedly mention a name, Audiobook. If he was not mistaken, this should be the name of the monster. Now that he had a name, he just needed to put in some effort to find some useful clues. Just as Andre closed the notebook and was about to identify the cloak, and wand, a large amount of information popped up in his vision. Congratulations! You've completed the mission. Help the Church of the Goddess of Dawn explore the ancient ruins. The collection of hidden information for the mission has reached 100%. You have received the quest reward, 3,500 EXP. You have obtained a low-grade magic item, Arcane Apprentice Gloves. When casting a first or second rank arcane spell, the spell's power and duration will be increased by 50%. Note, you already know the monster's name. Please follow the clues as soon as possible. Time limit, 1 year. As the last message disappeared completely, Andre found that there was a pair of brown leather gloves in his hands. On the palm and the back of his hands, there was a complicated magic circle woven with silver magic threads. It seemed to be the kind of magic circle that increased the speed of gathering energy. Without any hesitation, he put on the gloves and moved a little. After making sure that it would not affect the flexibility of his fingers, he was relieved. Although the gloves did not look very eye-catching, its function was definitely not to be underestimated. Magic Missile, Grease, Cobweb, Melf's Acid Arrow, Invisibility, and other commonly used arcane spells would all be strengthened to a certain extent. At a critical moment, it could definitely surprise the opponent. Apart from the magic items, there was also a total of 25,000 EXP that had not been allocated. Especially after the ventilation pipe collapsed, the sunlight directly shot in and killed many shadow creatures. It could be said that he had a bountiful harvest. It was enough for him to squander for a period of time. Many things that he had wanted to make before could be started when he returned. While waiting for his teammates to wake up, Andre took the opportunity to identify the black magic cloak and the white bone wand. The former had absorbed a lot of shadow matter, so it had the ability to distort light, making it difficult for the wearer to be discovered in the dark. It was very suitable for thieves. He planned to bring it back as a gift for Black Lily Bonnie. The latter was a wand with 10 level 1 necromancy arcane spells stored in it, Weakening Ray. This spell could cause great damage to the target's muscles through negative energy, causing the target's strength attribute to rapidly decrease. The higher the level, the more severe the decrease. It could even reduce a normal person's strength to 0. In other words, the person's muscles would completely necrotize and they would die instantly. For those who did not have high strength attribute, especially Andre's pitiful 7 strength attribute, 2 shots would probably be enough to kill them. Carefully putting this weapon of mass destruction into his belt, he quickly deciphered the black-robed man's spellbook with a dispel spell. Immediately, he found that this spellbook was made of the leather of a hydra lizard. It was many times better than the one he had. Almost all the level 0 and level 1 spells were copied. There are also several level 2 to level 5 necromancy arcane spells, such as the level 3 vampiric touch. The spellcaster could absorb the target's life force through touch. Undead immobilize. Corpse manipulation. The spellcaster could resurrect zombies or skeletons from corpses, and so on. Most importantly, there were enough pages in this spellbook to be able to record more than 300 arcane spells. Therefore, after a little consideration, Andre immediately took out his original spellbook and compared them with each other. He then took out the scrolls from the scroll box and copied them one by one into the new spellbook, completely eliminating the inferior product made of winterwolf skin. Of course, the original spellbook was not useless. After all, there were about 40 arcane spells recorded in it, especially several level 4 arcane spells, which could be kept for apprentice Beverly. For this little girl, this spellbook could be considered luxurious. After all, in the spellbook of an ordinary apprentice, there would not be more than 6 arcane spells recorded, but she had 40 arcane spells all of a sudden. Chapter 242. Just as Andre finished dealing with all the spoils of war, the air in the air suddenly began to spin rapidly. In the blink of an eye, 2 magic whirlpools were formed. Not long after, 2 humanoid creatures with white wings appeared out of thin air. They were the heavenly creatures that were banished by the Lich not long ago. One of them, who was slightly taller, looked around vigilantly and quickly asked, "Human, Where did that terrifying lich go? I'm not sure. After he said a few words, he disappeared without a trace. I think he might have returned to his nest. Andre pretended to shrug his shoulders helplessly. He had read in a book that the heavenly creatures referred to the special races that lived in the Chongshan Plain. They were kind, brave, and willing to help others, but they had a fatal weakness, which was that they could not tolerate sand in their eyes. Their attitude towards evil was very clear, which was to completely obliterate from the body to the soul. For this, they would not hesitate to sacrifice themselves. Many good gods like to recruit the heavenly creatures to serve them, and the heavenly creatures would also choose to worship the gods that had similar ideals to their own. The two guys in front of him were obviously the servants of the goddess of dawn, Lucia, so they especially hated the undead. Andre could not guarantee how they would react if they knew that he had reached an agreement with the lich, so he decisively chose to hide it. There were many ways to hide the truth, and lying was definitely the worst way, especially in front of the heavenly creatures. One of their innate spell-like abilities was lie detection. Andre obviously knew this, so he chose to tell the truth. Sometimes, the truth was more deceptive than a lie. Even the smartest people would inevitably be misled. After the tall, heavenly creature heard that the lich had left, he was slightly relieved. He hurriedly raised his hands and prayed loudly. A golden light flashed, and the women who were affected by the sleeping magic opened their eyes one after another. They gently rubbed their foreheads, trying to figure out what had just happened and why they suddenly fainted. Perhaps it was because people with thick nerves recovered very quickly. Chloe was the first to wake up. She stared with her two beautiful big eyes and exclaimed loudly, "Ah, I remember. There was a terrifying lich here just now." "That's right. I remember too. Where's the lich? What did he do to us?" Leader Clarice was the second to regain consciousness. She hurriedly looked around with her warhammer in hand. "Don't worry. He has already left. Now, there is no one else here except for us." Seeing that everyone was nervous, Andre finally couldn't help but remind them. "Good heavens, this is the best news I've ever heard in my life. You have to know that my legs went soft just now, and I couldn't even stand up." He seemed to be surrounded by some kind of terrifying power. "Even now, I still feel cold all over when I think about it," Chloe said while subconsciously shrinking her neck. It seemed that the old lich's powerful aura of fear had traumatized her. After all, as a novice adventurer and a noble lady, it was not easy for her to maintain her consciousness in front of a legendary tier lich. This kind of situation would slowly fade as her level increased, so there was no need to worry too much. "What did the lich talk to you about after we fell asleep?" Clarice asked with a frown. She wasn't Chloe, who could be easily dismissed. She asked the most important question as soon as she opened her mouth. Andre pretended to helplessly spread out his hands and explained, "It's very simple. He came to thank me for putting on a good show for him. You might not know, but the dead black-robed man was actually his acolyte. We were merely chess pieces that were controlled by him, tools that he used to conduct his trials." "What?" Clarice's face instantly turned ugly. "You mean to say that the lich is the mastermind behind this exploration? No matter how unwilling I am to admit it, I still have to say that we have been tricked this time. It's a complete failure. Tell me, what do you plan to do?" Clarice took a deep breath and forcefully calmed her restless emotions. She replied with a gloomy expression, "I must immediately report this matter to the bishop. Moreover, a large part of the sealed labyrinth has collapsed. The temple must immediately send people to repair it. Otherwise, it will attract thousands of adventurers and people with ulterior motives." Andre glanced at the huge hole above his head and nodded lightly. "What you said makes sense, but I don't think it can be repaired with this kind of damage. Look, the supporting beams are completely broken. The best way to solve this problem is to station a group of temple knights here. We don't need too many, about 50 of them will be enough. This will deter those adventurers with ulterior motives and also serve as a warning. Young human mage, you don't understand the importance of this place. No matter what price we have to pay, the labyrinth must be repaired. The seal must be absolutely safe. Otherwise, once it is broken, all life within a few hundred kilometers will be destroyed. I think it's best to send a messenger to inform a church. The rest of the people will stay here to guard in case of any accidents." The eyes of the slightly shorter heavenly creatures flashed with golden light as they spoke very seriously. There was no doubt that this servant from the kingdom of the goddess of dawn was very dissatisfied with Andre's indifference. His tone was very stiff, which made people feel very uncomfortable. Perhaps in the eyes of most people in Or, the heavenly creatures were the messengers of the good God. They were a higher race than humans. However, in Andre's eyes, they were no different from the demons from the abyss and the devils that crawled out from hell. They were all foreign invaders. It was just that the methods of the demons were cruel, violent, and bloody. The devils relied on the greed in the hearts of humans to achieve their goals. On the other hand, the heavenly creatures wanted the mortals to agree with their ideas and thoughts. They wanted to fundamentally change the current situation of the world. There was a saying that there were two ways to destroy a race from its roots. One of them was a massacre, and the other was to completely assimilate their language, ideology, and culture. The former was not only time-consuming and laborious, but it could easily lead to large-scale resistance. Moreover, the losses would definitely not be small. Compared to the former, the latter was much more brilliant, especially when a higher civilization launched a cultural invasion on a lower civilization. As long as the method was right, it would not take long to achieve the established goal. Chapter 243. Obviously, the heavenly creatures were very similar to the latter. Fortunately, it wasn't easy for them to appear in the mortal world. Only when the gods needed to carry out some important mission would they pay a hefty price to send them over. Just imagine if humans were as upright, selfless, helpful, and completely selfless as the heavenly creatures, what kind of state would they be in? What was the difference between them and machines? No matter if it was a civilization or a society, if they wanted to develop healthily, they couldn't do without diversity. There was no such thing as absolute kindness or absolute evil in the world. There were only differences due to different ideas and interests, at least most of the time. To be honest, Andre would rather trade with the cunning demons and chat with the cruel demons than deal with the inflexible and meticulous creatures from the heavenly realm. This was because these guys didn't understand what it meant to be flexible. They wouldn't even tolerate the slightest bit of evil behavior. Looking at the other party's arrogant appearance, he resisted the urge to rush up and punch him. Instead, he turned to Clarice and said, "Madam, I think I've already completed my mission. The rest is up to the church. As for how to deal with this ruin, please feel free to do as you please. I'm tired now, and I want to go home and rest as soon as possible." "Of course. Thank you very much for your help. If it wasn't for you, I'm afraid we would all have died in the hands of those evil shadow mages. Also, I'll report everything you've done during the adventure to the church. I'll personally send the reward in 2 weeks at most." Clarice elegantly bowed as she spoke. The other members of the church standing behind her also nodded. Even the heavily injured paladin, Katerina, struggled to stand up and saluted. They were very clear that in this dangerous journey, if it wasn't for the endless means and powerful arcane spells of this youth in front of them, they would have no chance of completing the mission except for the complete annihilation. Although they hadn't known each other for a long time, and some of them hadn't even spoken a few words, but they had already established a relationship of blind trust between them. At least when something unexpected happened, the first person they thought of was Andre, not Clarice, who was the leader. "I'm also honored to be able to experience this exciting adventure with you beautiful ladies. Goodbye." Andre bowed politely. After saying goodbye, he didn't even pay attention to the heavenly realm creature who had just spoken. He directly waved at Chloe and her attendant Nina and turned around to leave. The shorter guy was instantly enraged. He spread his wings and swooped down, grabbing Andre's wrist. "You can't leave now, before the labyrinth is repaired. Everyone must stay behind to protect the seal. I don't need you to teach me what to do. Now horse. Charge. Hold. Hand. Release. Open." Andre's face suddenly became gloomy. His eyes flashed with a sharp light. His orange-red pupils were like two flames, fully reflecting his master's emotions that were about to explode. As for his torch-like hair, it had already ignited with sparks. The surrounding temperature rapidly rose, and there was even a burnt smell in the air. Perhaps before he obtained the fire elemental bloodline, according to his mature and steady character, he wouldn't take the initiative to start a conflict with a powerful otherworld creature, even if their ideals were different. But now, as the fire elemental bloodline began to spread throughout his body, Andre's character gradually became a little impulsive. To be exact, he had a bit of a fiery temper, especially when he was forced to participate in a dangerous game under the threat of the Lich's powerful strength. So his mood was particularly bad. Now that he met a guy who thought he was infallible, he finally completely exploded. The shorter heavenly realm creature wasn't frightened. Instead, he released his own kindness power, tried to use this energy to calm his irritable mood. It had to be said that his behavior was indeed impeccable. Although he was very angry at Andre's rudeness and selfishness, he didn't take the initiative to attack. Instead, he tried his best to control his strength to prevent himself from accidentally injuring others. But unfortunately, Andre, who was in an explosive state, didn't appreciate his kindness. The corner of his mouth slightly rose, revealing a cold smile that made people shudder. He instantly released the innate ability of a fire elemental descendant, flame extension. Boom! Following a loud sound, with him as the center, a radius of 5 meters instantly turned into a purgatory. The bright flames seemed to have swallowed everything, and the terrifyingly high temperature burned the soil on the ground black. The heaven realm creature was caught off guard, and its entire body was covered in flames. It rolled out of the burning range of the flames, and the skin on its body was dark red. Large blisters were everywhere, and its pure white wings were also burned black. One must know that this was all thanks to the heavenly realm creature's tenacious vitality. If it was an ordinary person, they would have completely turned into a charred corpse. Looking at the other party's battered and exhausted appearance, Andre laughed in disdain. He reached out his hand and grabbed a burning flame. With an emotionless voice, he said, "Remember, this is just a lesson. If there is a next time, I don't mind directly roasting you. Also, put away your self-righteous face. At the same time, don't talk to me with a righteous tone, because your so-called justice, kindness, and fairness are all bullshit in my eyes. Only benefits are eternal." The tall heavenly realm creature carefully checked his companion's injuries. He immediately stood up and questioned loudly, "Mage, don't you think that you have gone overboard?" "Overboard? No. On the contrary, I don't think that I have done enough. Do you know, in my eyes, you heavenly realm creatures who like to criticize the human world all day long are far more annoying than demons who lure mortals into depravity and demons who wreak havoc. Because you're trying to imprison the human's thoughts and creativity. If it wasn't for the sake of the ladies, do you think that idiot lying on the ground would still be alive? Although the real strength of the two of you is far above me, if I want to kill the two of you, it won't be any harder than killing that shadow mage just now. It's as if he easily locked the two of you in a cage. Now, before I completely get angry, get lost." Andre, who had accumulated a lot of negative emotions, unscrupulously used his poisonous tongue to scold the two heavenly realm creatures. Then, he turned around and walked towards the outer edge of the forest. He knew that what he did today might offend a lot of people, but what could he do? Chapter 244. Ever since he met the Lich, he seemed to have figured out one thing. Taking the initiative to please others or to please them would certainly allow him to gain some so-called connections. However, these so-called connections were not stable and could be cut off at any time due to various reasons. After all, the whole of Orire was a world that worshipped power. In the face of great power, everything else had to stand aside. Look at the old Lich. He had almost turned the whole South into his playground, wantonly playing with the cities, ancient families, and churches of various gods. Everyone knew of his existence, but they still worked hard for him. This was the power that came with absolute power. Even the mastermind behind the scenes, who was plotting to overthrow the regime of Lincoln City, had to obediently submit to the old Lich's tyrannical power. As a transmigrator, Andre now knew how powerful the top spellcasters in this world were. At the same time, something called ambition was born in his heart. It was like a ferocious cub, constantly devouring his heart. His previous calm attitude had completely disappeared, replaced by a desire for power. Just like the old Lich, he wanted to be a chess player who stood above the masses, not a chess piece for others to control. Andre wanted to control his own fate and not be controlled by anyone else. In order to achieve this goal, he would begin to win this game by any means necessary. Other than the bottom line that he had to uphold, he could abandon everything else. The sudden conflict came and went quickly. As Andre brought Chloe, Nina, Small Eyes, and the winter wolf Michelle and gradually disappeared into the forest, everything finally came to an end. The tall heavenly realm creature did not make any threatening moves in the end. He just helped his companion up and silently returned to the sealed stone door that led to the lower level, continuing to fulfill his duty. It was unknown whether it was because he was frightened or because he did not want to be nosy in the first place. He just helped his companion up and silently returned to the sealed stone door that led to the lower level, continuing to fulfill his duty. As for the members of the church led by Clarice, they were slightly embarrassed because under normal circumstances, they should have stood on the side of the two divine servants. But drawing their swords against their companions who had gone through life and death with them was obviously unreasonable. But now he was safe and sound. With the help of the healing magic, the injured short man was completely healed in a short while. For a heavenly creature whose physical fitness was far superior to humans, this kind of burn was nothing. Even if he didn't receive treatment, he would recover in 2 or 3 days at most. "Dear, you look a little scary just now. Are you okay?" After walking in the dense forest for a period of time, Crowley stared with his 2 large eyes and asked cautiously. The girl's concern calmed Andre down a little. He immediately turned around and intimately pinched her nose, forcing a smile, and said, "Of course I'm fine. I was just a little upset just now, but now I've thought it through." Seeing that her lover had returned to normal, Chloe immediately returned to her original curiosity and asked with a playful smile, "What did you think?" "Let's hear it." "It's very simple. The life we usually see is actually fake. It's controlled by someone behind the scenes. Do you still remember that Lich? He's the true uncrowned king of the entire South. If you want to control your own destiny, you must first obtain great power, and to obtain power, you must first obtain resources. Thus, I've decided to seize the right to rule Lincoln City in the next year and a half." Without hiding anything, Andre directly told her his plan. After such a long time together, he already knew that this somewhat careless girl in front of him would never betray him, so he didn't hide anything except a few secrets. "Wow, really?" Chloe's face revealed an unconcealable shock. Her mouth was wide open and didn't close for a long time. Andre smiled and nodded. "Of course. This is what that Lich told me himself. I have to say that although you're usually a little muddle-headed, your intuition is outstanding. You understand that power is the most important thing in this world, and you're willing to work hard and sweat for it. Keep it up, and I believe that one day you'll become a great wandering poet. But I didn't think so much back then. I was just very obsessed with arcane magic." Chloe stuttered as she explained. She obviously hadn't expected to be praised so suddenly. Her face flushed slightly, and she appeared to be at a loss. "It's because you didn't think too much that I said your intuition is sharp. Normally speaking, the more complex a person's thoughts are, the easier it is for them to be distracted by other things. At the same time, it's harder for them to persevere. That's why you need to maintain a focused mindset. Success is only a matter of time." As he spoke, Andre reached out and gently stroked the girl's hair. The remaining anger between his brows completely dissipated with the breeze in the forest. Chloe was extremely excited after being encouraged. She raised both her hands and shouted, "Thank you. I swear that I'll work even harder and become the best wandering poet in the entire continent." Just as the two were talking, the druid Nina, who had been following behind them all this time, suddenly stopped in her tracks. She sniffed the ground with her nose and immediately stood up to remind Link, "Master, I smell the scent of horses." According to the thickness of the scent, they should be not far ahead. To be exact, they're about 200 meters ahead. I think I can finally have a good meal. The female winter wolf, Michelle, not only spoke the common tongue fluently, she even opened her mouth wide and licked her teeth. Her eyes were filled with greed and cruelty. "Wow, you can actually speak." Chloe, who had always lived in the South, had never seen a winter wolf before. She was instantly shocked and cried out in shock. Michelle rolled her eyes and replied in a disdainful tone, "Tate, you're making a fuss over nothing. Of course I can speak. Not only can I speak the common tongue, I can even speak the Dwarven, Orc, Goblin, and Elven languages." With that, she raised her head high and put on a proud posture, as if waiting for someone to praise her. Chloe's face flushed red with excitement. She held up the winter wolf's head and shouted, "Goddess of dawn above, you're too amazing. You're the smartest wolf I've ever seen, even smarter than most humans." "Oomph, of course, but you should add most beautiful as an adjective. I think that's the only way to match my beautiful fur," Michelle said proudly. Chapter 245. It was obvious that this winter wolf was a little narcissistic. It kept licking its fur to ensure that it remained spotless. It wished that it could maintain its most elegant posture for 24 hours a day, even when it was sleeping. Seeing that she was getting more and more into her act, the corner of Andre's mouth twitched. He pulled the girl over and gently patted her head. "All right, winter wolves are a type of magical creature. Their intelligence is almost the same as a normal human's. It's normal for them to learn a few languages. So that's how it is." Crowley nodded in realization. "You see my kind?" Michelle turned her head, a hint of surprise on her face. Andre smiled and nodded. "Yes, my hometown is far away in the north. Not only have I seen them, I've even killed a few with my own hands. They are all cunning hunters. I had to put in a lot of effort to barely succeed. Damn it, I suddenly missed the cold winds in the north. I hate the damp and warm weather in the south." Michelle complained as she walked forward listlessly. She did not mind the death of her kind at all. When food was scarce, the Wolf King would usually kill the group and pick out the weakest of its kind to bite and eat. The law of survival of the fittest had long been ingrained in her bones. Compared to this, she hated the weather in the south more. After all, the fur of winter wolves was very special. It could completely isolate the loss of heat. In the cold winter in the north, they relied on this tenacious ability to survive. However, it was a pity that once they arrived in the south, their thick fur would become a burden. Although the current temperature was only around 20 degrees Celsius, which was the temperature that most people liked, it was already quite uncomfortable for the winter wolves. If Michelle had sweat glands, she would probably be sweating profusely by now. The distance of 200 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. The horses did not go far, and were leisurely grazing near the original spot where they were set free. The group quickly harnessed two horses. Andre and Chloe rode on them respectively and galloped towards the Valley Manor. As for Nina, she used her druid transformation ability and turned into a goshawk to soar in the sky. Little I also used her supernatural ability to fly. Only Michelle followed far behind with her tongue sticking out, constantly cursing the warm and humid climate. Since they didn't need to explore the way back, their speed was naturally much faster than when they came. The journey that would have taken 2.5 to 3 days was completed in 1.5 days. However, when they arrived in front of the castle, they were surprised to find that the castle was already prepared for battle. A large number of soldiers who were supposed to continue their training were nervously looking around with weapons in their hands. There were also a few arrows stuck in the ground. Seeing this situation, Andre suddenly felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly jumped down from his horse and carefully examined the nearby ground. It didn't take long before he found a large number of footprints. From the size, it was obviously bigger than an ordinary person. It should be either a barbarian, orc, or the most powerful bugbear family. Strange, There are so many footprints here, but it doesn't seem like there was a battle here. Could it be? Just as he was muttering to himself, the drawbridge above the castle was slowly lowered, and the iron gate of the main gate was pulled up. Abner, the head of internal affairs, led the way out and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Your Excellency, you're finally back. Come in. It's too dangerous outside." "Oh, quick, tell me what happened," Andre asked as he handed the horse to a servant and shook off the dust on his body. Abner explained with a wry smile, "Less than 2 days after you left, a large number of barbarians suddenly appeared near the valley. There were a lot of them, about 10,000. Most of them were women and children, and there were only about 500 adult warriors. They attacked Red Pine Manor, which was the closest to us, and looted all the food there. Then they looted Viscount Ebwa's manor and took all the food there as well. These fellows have their eyes on us now, but they didn't choose to attack us. They're only loitering nearby. For safety's sake, I've already sent a carrier pigeon to the city, hoping that Linton City will send reinforcements. However, for some reason, the City Hall's response is especially slow this time. There hasn't been any movement yet." Hearing this news, Andre immediately frowned. "Are you sure there are only women and children, and no old people?" "I'm very sure. There are only women and children, and no old people. Their adult warriors have different degrees of scars on their bodies, and it looks like they're fleeing or migrating. Looks like there's a large-scale tribal war in the border forest. These barbarians were defeated, so they had no choice but to flee to the human world to steal food. But was this caused by internal strife or an external invasion?" Andre narrowed his eyes, carefully analyzing the current situation. The barbarians could be called the overlords of the border forest. Their strong physiques and martial spirit meant that there weren't many creatures that could threaten them. The orcs and half-orcs could barely be considered one of them, and so could the bugbears. Then there was the powerful professional army of Linton City. As for the goblins and kobolds, they weren't even fit to carry the barbarians' shoes. A dozen or so barbarians could kill hundreds of goblins and kobolds. The rest of the ogres, trolls, and giants might be physically stronger than the barbarians, but their numbers were too few. They couldn't possibly take the initiative to attack the barbarians' habitat. "You mean to say these barbarians are the ones who fled after losing the war?" Abner asked uncertainly. Walking into the great hall of the castle, Andre tossed his heavy backpack onto the table and gently rubbed the space between his brows. "That's right. Think about it. Why would a group of barbarian tribes that hunt for a living suddenly enter the human world? Where are the old and young among them? There's only one answer. They were attacked by an unknown force and lost terribly. They had no choice but to let the old people in their tribe take up weapons to buy time. If I'm not wrong, there must have been a huge upheaval in the border forest." Abner's wrinkled face changed color when he heard this, and he cursed under his breath. "Damn it. I thought they launched a sudden attack because winter had just passed and there was a severe lack of food. They wanted to obtain some food and livestock. But who would have thought that it would be such a troublesome situation? This won't do. I have to hire a few adventurers to scout the forest and prepare for the worst." Chapter 246. As a scholar, Abner was well aware that the nature of the two was completely different. If the barbarians took the initiative to invade, then this raid would be no different from previous years. Once they had enough food, they would naturally return to the forest. However, if they were forced to do so, then Tua's Valley, which was closest to the border forest, would face a new threat. They would even have to guard against other human forces taking advantage of the situation. After all, this was the outermost area of Linton City's influence. 5 days to the west was Westertown, which belonged to Duke Wyn's territory. 2.5 days to the east was Count Carl's territory. They were very traditional nobles who focused on running their own territories. They had no affiliation with Linton City, and occasionally had some friction. In fact, ever since the ancient human kingdom of Toya, which unified the entire South, was destroyed by the ancient red dragon Crimson Flame Golden, this land had been divided up by countless nobles. There were thousands of large and small noble territories, among which were dukes that were larger than small kingdoms and knights that ruled over a few villages. Their geographical location and interests had formed countless alliances, and they were constantly at war all year round. Only the more enlightened nobles in the coastal areas found that the wealth brought by trade was far more than managing land, so they decisively gave up on expanding inland. Instead, they used large caravans and large amounts of gold coins to choke the nobles in the inland, using salt, cloth, and fine weapons and armor in exchange for food, captives, minerals, and slaves. It had to be said that this method was very groundbreaking. It was equivalent to sticking a tube in the neck of the inland nobles, constantly sucking their blood to strengthen themselves and weaken their potential enemies. However, everything had its pros and cons. The inland nobles were no fools. After more than 10 years of trade deficits, they were horrified to find that they were getting poorer and poorer, while the city-states of the Green Sea Alliance were getting richer and richer. Slowly, hatred was born. No one was willing to see their wealth being stolen by their neighbors bit by bit, even if it was in the name of trade. Especially when carts of grain and minerals were purchased by coastal merchants at extremely low prices and then transported back to be processed into weapons, armors, tools, soft and delicious snacks before being sold back at an outrageous price. As long as one was not blind, one would have a strong hatred for the rich. As the saying goes, anger rises from the heart, and evil grows from the guts. Although the inland nobles were no longer able to break free from the Green Sea Alliance's control over trade, they had invented a new method to make up for their losses. That was to have their private army pretend to be bandits and plunder. Most of the time, they would only rob a few caravans, but once their numbers reached a certain point, they would attack some relatively wealthy towns and manors. Of course, this wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was that some of the inland nobles would join forces with the monsters in the border forest to attack the coastal areas. This wasn't the first time they had done this. More than 100 years ago, the great-great-grandfather of the current Duke Wine had joined forces with the orcs and ambushed countless villages and manors on the outskirts of Lincoln City, taking away large amounts of food and wealth. Afterwards, the Lincoln City Council sent out troops in a fit of rage. Not only did they chase the orcs back into the depths of the forest, they even captured Duke Wine and hanged him in the middle of the city square. This hatred was deeply engraved in the hearts of his descendants. It was said that Duke Wine was still in contact with some of the tribes in the forest. Ever since Abner had come to Turith Valley, he had crammed up on the surrounding history and family genealogy and knew how dangerous his current position was. Perhaps the barbarian incident was Duke Wine's doing. It would be strange if he was in a good mood at the thought that his prosperous territory was about to be baptized by the flames of war. Relax, my butler. This matter isn't as bad as you think it is. It might even turn out to be a good thing. The corners of Andre's mouth curled up slightly as he sat down on a chair, raising his hand to signal the maid to prepare dinner. My apologies, my lord. I can't think of anything good with a group of barbarians circling around our territory. Moreover, there might be a large group of orcs, goblins, and kobold behind them. Perhaps our good neighbor, Duke Wine, has joined in as well. Abner smiled bitterly as he rubbed his eyes. Ever since the barbarians had appeared in large numbers, he hadn't slept for 2 whole days. He looked very tired, with obvious bags and dark circles under his eyes. Seeing that his subordinate didn't understand what he meant, Andre couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. Don't you think that these barbarian women and children are good labor? If I remember correctly, you said a few days ago that we bought too many cows, sheep, and pigs, and we don't have enough manpower, right? Oh God of knowledge. You want to take in those women and children? Abner cried out in shock. Why not? Andre asked in return, stroking his chin. You see, we need labor now, and those barbarians need food and shelter. We can work together. Abner didn't agree with this suggestion. He took a deep breath and explained, My lord, you might not know this, but the barbarians have a sense of pride and superiority that emanates from their bones. Even if they starve to death, they won't work for weak Southerners like us. This has been proven by countless scholars. No, don't be so absolute. Send a messenger to contact them and set a time and place for a discussion. At the same time, ask them about what happened in the forest. Oh, right. The barbarians don't have a habit of killing messengers, right? No, the barbarian warriors value bravery and honor very much. Unless provoked, they won't kill an opponent who is much weaker than them, let alone a messenger. Abner saw that Andre had made up his mind, so he could only answer truthfully. Even though he felt that this was purely a waste of time, he didn't continue to object out of respect for the nobles and mages. That's settled, then. Send one of the bolder servants to the barbarians' camp with a few bales of flour, 2 barrels of ale, and some jerky as a gift, and say that I wish to speak with their chief, and that this will be the reward for the brave. As he spoke, Andre took out a ruby that he had obtained during his adventure from his waist pouch and gently placed it on the table. It was not an easy job to contact the barbarians, especially those who didn't understand the barbarians' etiquette and rules. The slightest carelessness could result in one's head being chopped off because of the anger of the barbarians. Chapter 247. However, as a transmigrator, Andre knew that there was a saying that applied both on Earth and in Oreir, and that was that a generous reward would attract brave men. A ruby worth about 300 gold coins was a huge sum of money in the eyes of most ordinary people. They would not hesitate to give up their lives for it. The crimson gem shone with an alluring light under the illumination of the fire, and many people in the hall began to breathe heavily. Normally speaking, the male servants in the castle only received 20 silver coins a month, while the female servants received 25. This was because they were responsible for satisfying the special requests of the nobles in addition to their normal work. However, the only good thing about being a servant was that they were provided with food and lodging and would even be given 2 sets of clothes every year, so they did not need to spend much money. 300 gold coins was equivalent to a servant's annual income of more than 10 years. If they could obtain this sum of money, they could instantly escape poverty and buy a shop in the city, starting a small business with meager profits. As long as there were no accidents, with their remaining savings, they would definitely be able to live peacefully until the day of their death. Just when everyone's heart was racing and they were silently weighing whether life or wealth was more important, a male servant who looked to be only 17 or 18 years old suddenly stood out and knelt on the ground with a plop. He shouted excitedly, "Sir, I'm willing to go." Andre looked at the young man, kneeling in front of him, a satisfied smile appearing on his face. He looks like a brave warrior has been born. Relax. Tell me a name first. Fate. My name is Fate, my lord. The young servant nervously clenched his fists, his eyes never leaving the glowing ruby on the table for even a moment. Very good, Fate. You only need to go outside and find the barbarians' camp. Tell their leader to meet me, and this gem will be yours. Remember the time and place clearly. As for the gift, I will prepare it for you. With that, Andre gave him a look, stood up, and walked towards the second floor. Chloe and Nina followed closely behind. Abner immediately understood. He picked up the ruby on the table and waved at the young man who was kneeling on the ground. Don't just stand there. Come with me. It's not dark yet. Let's go and come back as soon as possible. Yes, Sir Chief. Please be at ease. I will definitely live up to Sir Lord's trust. Fert swiftly jumped up from the ground and stammered. As the youngest son of a farmer, he was very clear that the family's farmland belonged to his elder brother, and the livestock and poultry they raised belonged to the Lord. Other than his pitiful little savings, he was only left with a lowly life. Today, as long as he gave it his all, he would immediately be able to obtain a large sum of money and change his fate. Abner was a man of swift and decisive action. It took him less than 15 minutes to prepare a carriage. Not only was it loaded with the barbarians' favorite alcoholic beverages, it was also loaded with the food they needed the most. Fate drove the carriage quickly across the suspension bridge, and along the main road outside the valley, they slowly made their way towards Linton City. According to the latest news, this group of barbarians was currently stationed near the manor of Viscount Abois, waiting for an opportunity to strike. standing in front of the window on the second floor of the castle and watching the back of the young man gradually disappear into the distance. Andre lowered his voice and instructed Nina, behind him, "Follow him. If everything goes well, you don't have to show yourself. If something unexpected happens, you have to intervene. No matter what, you have to get the leader of this group of barbarians to meet me." "Understood. I've dealt with barbarians before. I know what kind of temper they have." With that, Nina nodded lightly, and her body began to rapidly transform. In the blink of an eye, she had turned from a human into an eagle. She flapped her wings and flew out of the window, following closely behind the carriage. As a rank 5 druid, she could transform herself into any small or medium-sized animal at will, including those that flew in the sky, ran on the ground, and swam in the water. However, this was only limited to creatures that were born and evolved in a natural state. Those that had been created or modified through magic and divine spells were not allowed. It could be said that this was a very convenient ability. Of course, this ability would increase with the level of their profession. Starting from rank 8, druids could transform into large animals such as brown bears, giant lizards, crocodiles, tigers, lions, and so on. They were not much inferior to warriors in hand-to-hand combat. At rank 11, they could transform into small animals such as hamsters, sparrows, and hummingbirds. They could often play an unexpected role in scouting and ambushing. At rank 15, they could transform into large animals such as dinosaurs, giant pythons, elephants, and rhinoceroses. After rank 16, druids would slowly shed their human identity and develop towards the 4 great elements of the natural world: earth, water, fire, and wind. Whether it was the earth elemental that was as hard as granite or the wind elemental that could fly at high speeds, they were not something that ordinary human armies could deal with. A druid follower with limitless potential. She's probably the biggest reward I've gained from this adventure. Andre mumbled to himself as he opened his backpack and took out the huge encyclopedia of magic potions and began to read. Although potions did not take up much of a role in arcane studies, it was the best tool for making money. This was especially true for potions that could increase a feudal knight's combat ability in a short period of time. These potions would often cause a commotion among the nobles, and it would not be strange for the price to increase by 5 to 10 times. At the same time, it could also increase one's reputation. Once one was crowned as a master potion maker, one's status would instantly become extraordinary. Even the king would have to salute and call him a master. To a certain extent, this was the best way to quickly raise one's social status without alerting others. He planned to use these few days of free time to master a few potion recipes that had been lost in history. He would take the opportunity to show them off when he returned to Lynn City. On one hand, it would help him better integrate into the circle of nobles, and, on the other, it would increase his authority in the association of mages. Since he had decided to play a game of conspiracy and wisdom with a mastermind, Andre would do his best. However, he had not been a mage for long enough. It was fine for him to bully brainless idiots, but he would always be at a disadvantage when compared to the truly experienced and astute senior mages. There is a saying that one should never use one's disadvantage to compete with the enemy's advantage. His advantage was the social skills that he had accumulated in his previous life, so he decisively chose to start with the complicated interpersonal relationships. Chapter 248. Even though he didn't know the exact identity of the Lich's apprentice, Andre was confident that he could gain the upper hand in terms of communication. He would then slowly squeeze out his opponent's sphere of influence and force them to make mistakes in the chaos, slowly expanding his advantage. In any form of conflict, gaining the upper hand was very important. He planned to start making arrangements when he returned to Lincoln City and build up his own influence as quickly as possible. Just as Andre was studying the potion formulas in the Encyclopedia of Magical Potions, fate finally met up with the barbarians in his carriage. To be more precise, he was stopped halfway by a barbarian patrol. Looking at the 2-meter-tall man with arms thicker than his thighs, he decisively stopped the carriage and yelled at the top of his voice, Don't do anything. I'm a messenger from the Two-Ways Valley. Look, I brought gifts and a message from my master. I want to see your leader." The leading barbarian warrior looked at the trembling youth in front of him with disdain and said gruffly, "Oomph. Look, another weak southerner. Guess if Leader Wharton will chop off his head and hang it on the flagpole with that idiot from yesterday?" Thud! Poor Fate's legs gave way, and he knelt on the ground. His lips were purple from fear, and his teeth were chattering nonstop. A large patch of his pants was instantly wet. "Ha ha ha ha! Look, this southerner actually peed himself. I really don't understand why Leader Wharton is so careful. We can continue south and take more food. We can make these southerners our slaves and farm the land for us, filling the stomachs of our women and children." Another barbarian warrior mocked the youth loudly as he impatiently expressed his thoughts. However, he obviously didn't notice that the leading warrior was already frowning. He growled in a low voice after a few seconds. "Enough! Have you forgotten how we ended up in this state? Or do you think that we can stop the powerful knights of Lincoln City with just 500 of us? Remember, we are no longer the powerful tribe that everyone feared, but a group of refugees. Don't cause any more trouble for the leader. He has already exhausted all his energy to feed so many mouths. He doesn't have time to waste on you." As a warrior leader, he was very clear about the current situation of the tribe. It was already very difficult to feed more than 10,000 people. Even if they looted everywhere, they could only keep themselves half full. Moreover, the enemies behind them could catch up at any time and kill them all. From a certain point of view, both the external and internal environments had reached their worst state. If they were not careful, the barbarian tribes in the border forest would become history, and the 10,000 women and children would become the targets of the enemy's slaughter and enslavement. With the sudden reprimand from the leader of the warriors, the atmosphere suddenly became heavy. Even the guy who was proud of himself a moment ago was not looking good. His two hands were tightly clenched into fists, and his breathing became rapid. His eyes were bloodshot, and no one knew whether it was because of anger or hatred. "All right, I don't want to talk too much nonsense. Bring this person along and meet the leader. Also, you better not underestimate the Wizard Lord in Two-Ways Valley. He personally defeated the Ogre King and more than 2,000 warriors of the Shift's tribe. It is said that he has mastered very terrifying sorcery. Why else do you think the leader didn't give the order to attack?" Having said that, the leading warrior grabbed Fate, and the other warriors were in charge of leading the carriage. They slowly moved towards the camp. One of the warriors carried a weapon on his back and took the lead to run. It seemed like he was going to report back. Barbarian warriors had extraordinary endurance. They could run for hours in the wilderness, and their speed was sometimes comparable to that of a horse. Some of the more powerful ones could even run for days and nights. It could be said that their muscle and heart functions were far beyond the best athletes on Earth. The magical energy that was everywhere had changed the body beyond imagination. However, it would only gradually become apparent after reaching level 12. With the help of a group of barbarians, Felt, who had completely lost his ability to think, was carried into the camp. Many children around the age of 10 followed behind with wooden sticks in their hands, looking at him curiously. Some even poked him twice with the wooden sticks in their hands to see if he was dead or not. Of course, Fate was definitely not dead. He was just scared out of his wits. He was starting to regret accepting this mission, and his mind was filled with thoughts of how he could ensure that his head wouldn't be chopped off. After passing through the camp filled with large pots, the group came to the center. They saw a young man covered in tattoos sitting by the campfire, listening to the teachings of an old man. He nodded from time to time, and his expression was serious and solemn. The strong barbarian warrior threw Fate to the ground and bowed to the young man. "Leader Wharton, we intercepted this person outside. He was driving a carriage with some ale, flour, and dried meat. He claimed to be a messenger from Two-Ways Valley." "Messenger?" The young man called Wharton turned around and looked at the trembling Fate in surprise. He then turned back to ask the old man, "Witch Doctor Tutamanka, what do you think of this matter?" The old man was obviously old. The wrinkles on his face were like tree bark, wrinkled and piled together. He gently stroked the sparse beard on his chin and replied in a low voice, "Be careful. I can feel that the master behind this messenger is very scheming. He's probably plotting against us, but I don't feel any malice from it. You are the leader of this tribe that was put together at the last minute. Make your own decision. The only thing I need to remind you is that you must not let your guard down. Thank you for your wise advice. Without your help, we would have starved to death. Please don't worry. I plan to ask about the situation first, and then gather the senior warriors for a discussion. After all, we are facing the person who killed Ogre King." Wharton stood up and put on what he thought was a friendly smile. He tried to help the young man up from the ground. However, he didn't know that his actions had turned into a cruel smile in Fate's eyes. Fate's eyes rolled back, and he fainted. Chapter 249. Wharton was dumbfounded. He stood there stupidly, not knowing what to do. He turned his head and looked at the old shaman for help. He wanted to get some advice or help. Needless to say, this scene was quite funny. The barbarian warrior's face was red, and the corner of his mouth was twitching. He looked like he wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. Tutuminka shook his head slightly. He grabbed some blue powder and sprinkled it on the fire. Instantly, a ghostly flame shot up into the sky and slowly formed the shape of an eagle. It circled around the bonfire. He looked up at the dark sky and suddenly shouted, "Son of nature in the sky, don't you want to come down and have a talk with me?" Caw! Following a high-pitched screech, a majestic goshawk swooped down from the sky and landed steadily next to the bonfire. Its body quickly transformed, and in just a few seconds, it turned back into a human. It was Druid Nina, who had been following behind them all this time. After landing on the ground, she slightly bowed to the old man and greeted him with a rather surprised tone. "Hello, respected soul walker. I really didn't expect to see a living soul shaman in the distant south." "Ha ha ha, there's nothing to be surprised about. Wherever there are souls and essences, there will be soul shamans. They give us power and teach us how to balance the relationship between the human world and the spiritual world. It's just like how you druids protect nature." Tutumunka laughed and explained. Although his identity was exposed, he wasn't displeased at all. Instead, he admitted that he wasn't a shaman. In fact, although soul shamans and witch doctors looked very similar, they were fundamentally different. The latter was like an elder with rich knowledge of nature. They could use herbs and some animal bones to treat the members of the tribe. Usually, they could also communicate with some gods or powerful creatures. The former was a profession very similar to the druids, but the druids' power came from nature, while the soul shaman's power came from soul essences, elemental creatures, incorporeal undead creatures, and some special creatures from other planes. They also used nature's divine spells, but the number of divine spells they mastered was fewer, and the number of times they could cast them was much higher. Some scholars once commented that soul shamans and druids were almost the same as sorcerers and mages. However, soul shamans were better at dealing with spiritual creatures, such as ghosts and spirits. This was because many of their skills were related to the soul. There were very few soul shamans in Oraire. Most ordinary people didn't even know about this profession. In addition, they spent most of their time living with the wild tribes, so they rarely appeared in people's sight. On the other hand, druids who also liked to live in forests and mountains could often come in contact with them. Since both sides had similar ideologies, they often chose to work together to deal with those who maliciously destroyed the natural environment. Their relationship was quite harmonious. The only difference was that the soul shaman preferred to stay in the primitive tribes and guide them to follow the path of the soul, while the druids preferred to live with wild animals, flowers, and trees, living a secluded life. The barbarian leader Wharton was obviously very curious about the elf girl who suddenly appeared. He especially showed a trace of respect for her ability to turn into a goshawk and fly freely in the sky. Although most barbarians were full of fear, disgust, and prejudice when it came to magic, they didn't know why they didn't reject magic potions, weapons, armor, bracers, boots, and other equipment. As for the divine arts, it was even more so for the animals and plants that turned into natural spirits after death. There had always been a very primitive and devout belief in them. Therefore, wild beasts such as eagles, bears, wolves, tigers, lions, leopards, and so on often had special meanings. Some represented bravery, some represented speed, and some represented strength. The goshawk represented heroes. According to barbarian legends, whenever a hero was born in the tribe, goshawks would descend from the sky and offer the blessings of their ancestors. Therefore, Wharton felt that Nina's sudden appearance should be a sign that she would become the savior of the barbarian tribe in the border forest. Just when he was about to say something, Tutu Monka suddenly stood up. His image of an old and weak man was completely different. It was as if he had turned into a ferocious beast. A translucent spirit of a giant bear loomed behind him, giving the people around him great pressure. He grabbed a handful of fire with his withered old hand and fiddled with it as he wished. He lowered his voice and said, "Young son of nature, before you tell us why you are here, I need to make a statement. Although we are on the verge of destruction, we still have some power, enough to kill anyone who has evil intentions. I hope you can understand this. Please don't worry. I don't have any evil intentions this time. I just want to convey a message. My master wants to talk to you about the survival and future of barbarians." Nina didn't care about the old man's threat at all. "Master? Who is your master? What does he want?" Tutu Monka asked with a frown. Nina turned around and glanced at the unconscious fate. She answered expressionlessly, "My master is the Lord of Tulsi Valley. His name is Andre. As for his purpose, it's better to wait until you meet him. Of course, you can decide the time and place." An invitation from a wizard. Tutu Monka's expression changed slightly. As he muttered under his breath. Then, he raised his head and continued to ask, "What does he want from us?" "I believe you can see that we are just a group of refugees. We don't have anything of value, and we don't have any plans to invade the villages and manors around Lincoln City. The only thing we can do is struggle to survive. My master wants to know what happened in the forest at the border. At the same time, he wants you to work for him. In return, he will give you food and protect you from being hunted down by your enemies." As soon as Nina finished speaking, the young barbarian leader standing next to her immediately roared in agitation. "He wants us to work for a wizard? In your dreams. Unless he defeats us in battle. Otherwise, we will never serve any weak southerner. Especially when he's a wizard who uses evil magic." Obviously, like most barbarians, Wharton didn't have a friendly attitude towards Arcanists. To be more precise, he treated them as if they had killed his father. If it weren't for the fact that she was a woman, he would have grabbed his weapon and charged at her. Chapter 250. Since you're willing to choose death, I won't waste any more words. Goodbye. Oh, by the way, before I leave, I'll kindly inform you that when I was flying over, I circled around the edge of the forest and accidentally saw a large army advancing in this direction from afar. They'll arrive in at most one day and one night. I hope they're not here to kill you all." After saying that, Nina revealed a cold smile on her face. She directly transformed into a goshawk, flapped her wings, and flew into the sky. As a druid, she didn't care about the lives of these barbarians. She didn't even care about the lives of the entire human world. In fact, the druids of Orire were more like the cold-blooded animals described in Tao Te Ching. Heaven and earth are merciless and treat all creatures as dogs. In their eyes, protecting the law of survival of the fittest and the natural cycle was more important than anything else. As for the life and death of one or two species, it was insignificant in front of the great nature. Although the druids often had conflicts with the residents and nobles living around the forest in order to protect the forest, those were the actions of a few extremist sections. The real primitive druids normally only cared about the basic needs. For example, if a person was hungry, they would kill a rabbit and eat it. If a person was very cold, they would cut off some branches to use as firewood. These were all part of the natural cycle, and they wouldn't care about them at all. What they really wanted to stop was the endless destruction of the natural environment for the purpose of profit. For this, they wouldn't hesitate to kill thousands of people. Balance was the rule that all druids had to follow. Otherwise, they would not be able to receive blessings from nature, and they would not be able to use nature's divine spells. It was also this balance that made most of the druids who were absolutely neutral seem very cold. They could watch a beggar starve to death without giving a single copper coin, and they could watch a newborn freeze to death without giving a single piece of clothing. In their eyes, birth, old age, sickness, and death were a cycle. It was a balance that couldn't be broken, and it was the guarantee of the whole world's continuous operation. Without a doubt, Nina was such a cold druid. She never cared about the so-called good and evil, much less the lives of more than 10,000 barbarians. Thus, after receiving an affirmative answer, she did not give the other party a chance to continue speaking. She spread her wings and flew towards the castle. As Tutu Monka watched the goshawk gradually disappear into the distance, he instantly showed signs of fatigue. He turned around and returned to his seat, sighed helplessly, and muttered to himself, "Sigh." They caught up after all. Wharton was so angry that he raised his fist and slammed it on the table. Wood chips flew everywhere. He gritted his teeth and cursed loudly. "Bastard! We have given up our homes and hunting grounds. Those filthy half-beastmen still won't let us off. Bah! Since that's the case, we might as well go all out. Let the bravery of the barbarians remain forever in the hearts of the people." His words were instantly echoed by many of the adult warriors. For a moment, the crowd was agitated. They all waved their weapons and shouted, wanting nothing more than to charge out and fight to the death with their enemies. Seeing this, a bitter smile appeared on Tutu Munka's face. He raised his arm and waved his hand. "No, now is not the time to show off. First, we need to ensure that we can survive. Moreover, we are far from being at the end of our rope. Wake up that youth who calls himself an envoy. I think we need to start considering the mage lord's suggestion." You mean you want us to serve a sorcerer who uses evil magic?" Wharton's eyes widened. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. It wasn't just him. All of the barbarian warriors present seemed to have been immobilized. Their mouths were open so wide that one could stuff a goose egg into them. The old man nodded helplessly. "That's right. Becoming someone's vassal is much better than letting the women and children become the spoils of war of the enemy, isn't it? Moreover, we still have a chance to negotiate. We might be able to get a better deal." 2 hours later, the last rays of the sun finally disappeared from the horizon. It was replaced by a sky full of stars and a bright moon. No one knew what was going on in this world. The moon and the stars could defy common sense and hang in the night sky at the same time. It was said that the moon represented the goddess of the moon, Serene, and each of the stars represented a god. Although it sounded strange, this saying was deeply rooted in people's hearts. From the king to the commoners, no one had ever doubted it. Even the wizards who pursued the truth could not find out the truth. The legends of countless gods made the night sky particularly beautiful, especially the bright moon. It seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mysterious fog, giving people endless fanciful thoughts. Unfortunately, Fert had no time to appreciate the beautiful scenery in front of him. He was in a daze. His mind was filled with the words that the old man had just said to him. At the same time, he was thinking about how to explain it to his lord. Unknowingly, he arrived at the castle at the entrance of the valley. Because it was a full moon tonight, the soldiers standing on the wall recognized the young man at first glance. They quickly ordered their companions to lower the drawbridge. A few minutes later, the young man returned to the safety of the castle. Andre was eating at the long table in the hall. On his left and right were Chloe and Elsa. The little lowly Beverly was sticking close to her mother. She quickly opened a boiled goose egg, dipped it in sauce, and put it into her mouth. After more than a month of nutrition, her thin face had finally regained some baby fat. Although her height had not increased significantly, her body was not as thin as before. Her second feature was that she had begun to develop slowly. It seemed that in a year or two, she would be almost the same as the noble girls of the same age. As an attendant, Nina sat next to Chloe. When she ate, She did not use a knife or fork at all. Instead, she just grabbed the food with her hands. She did not have the elegance of the legendary elves. Instead, she looked more like a rude barbarian. Fortunately, in order not to attract attention, she deliberately used the hood to cover her pointed ears, so the servants only felt that it was a pity. Such a beautiful woman. When she ate, it was as if she was fighting a war. Especially that face full of oil paint. It was completely like a ghost. They did not know that Nina had been hunting in the wild with the winter wolves since she was very young. Her wild nature and survival instincts had been deeply ingrained in her bones. They were afraid that she would never be able to learn how to eat like a gentleman or a lady. As for her animal companion, the winter wolf Michelle, it had already eaten its fill. It was lying on a felt not far away, burping and playing with the cat with its paws. Chapter 251. The head of internal affairs, Abner, was sitting at the back, tasting a fresh base. As someone who came from a relatively dry area, he had a special preference for fish, prawns, crabs, and shellfish. Every bite was delicious. The chef's cooking method was simple. He smeared oil and salt on the body of the fish, then put onions, ginger, and garlic into the belly of the fish and threw it into the pot to steam for 10 minutes. But to Abner, this was already a rare delicacy. He would close his eyes to savor the taste after every bite, as if he wanted to keep the delicious taste in his mouth forever. A few young women served him carefully, while the male servants stood on both sides, quietly waiting for their masters to finish eating. Obviously, this was a typical scene of nobles and Ori having a meal. But strictly speaking, a slave like Abner did not have the right to sit at the table. Fortunately, he had been appointed as the head of internal affairs and was in charge of the construction and management of the entire territory. The huge power offset the difference in status, so he was able to sit at the table and eat. Looking at the table full of food, coupled with the fragrance in the air, Fart subconsciously swallowed his saliva and bowed respectfully. He stuttered, My lord, I'm back." Andre swallowed the food in his mouth, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and raised his head to ask, "Speak. What good news have you brought?" He had heard Nina's report more than an hour ago. At the same time, he also knew that there was an army of goblins, earth goblins, and half-orcs marching toward them. There were about 10,000 of them. Although most of them were ordinary goblins, ants could still kill an elephant when there were enough of them, let alone a group of thugs armed with lethal weapons. Without a doubt, they were coming for the barbarians. Now, the mystery had been revealed. It turned out that the barbarians had been driven out of the border forest by a terrifying number of monsters. And for some reason, the other party seemed to want to kill them all. "My lord, the barbarians said that they are willing to meet with you to discuss the conditions. The time is tonight at midnight, and the location is in the open space outside the valley." Fart took a deep breath and replied with trembling. Hearing this, Andre paused for a moment, then suddenly laughed out loud. "Ha ha! Who said that the barbarians are all stubborn? See, they know how to compromise in the face of danger. Looks like tonight's negotiation will be very interesting. Are you sure you want to meet the barbarians at night? I'm afraid that's not very safe, is it?" Abner raised his doubts with a frown. Nina directly wiped her mouth with a dirty leather wristband and said with a contemptuous smile, "You don't have to worry about that. They can't even take care of themselves now, so they definitely won't take the initiative to provoke any enemies." Andre nodded. "That's right. War is coming. Inform Buzz to stop training from tonight. Distribute all the helmets, breastplates, bows, arrows, poisons, lances, and scimitars we bought. Feed all the war horses to ensure they have enough stamina. As the saying goes, soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment." Even though it had only been a month or so of training, the cavalry from the kingdom of Brant already had the demeanor of elites. In addition, they were veterans who had been on the battlefield for a long time. Therefore, they didn't have the trouble of new recruits on the battlefield. "War. Are there people coming to attack this place again?" Elsa asked with a face full of anxiety. As a normal person, she was most afraid of war and slaughter. After the last war with the barbarians, She had nightmares for several days. She still had lingering fears when she thought about it. "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. You just have to stay in the castle with peace of mind," Andre said as he patted the young widow's shoulder comfortingly. He stood up and walked to Fate, looking up and down at the frightened youth. "What else did the barbarians ask you to bring? Tell me everything in one breath." Fate gulped nervously and took a deep breath. "There's an old man called Tutumanka who said that if you don't intend to interfere in this matter, then the monster's next target will be Lincoln City and the surrounding villages. A threat." Andre muttered softly to himself. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, revealing a trace of disdain. He didn't believe that a mere 10,000 monsters could do anything to Lincoln City. Putting aside the powerful association of mages and the churches of the gods, just the city guards and the knights would be enough to make the enemies suffer, not to mention the private armies of the nobles and the impregnable city walls. Back then, the ogre mages had gathered an allied army of over 300,000 monsters. What had happened in the end? After fiercely attacking for half a month, they could only end up nursing a grievance at the foot of the city wall. They ran back to the border forest with their tails between their legs. It was said that blood and corpses dyed the ground red. That year, the crops and weeds grew more luxuriant than in previous years. After getting the information he wanted, Andre no longer paid any attention to the youth in front of him. He turned and walked towards the stairs. Seeing this, Nina hurriedly stood up and followed closely behind. It didn't take long for them to disappear around the corner of the stairs. Abner understood the urgency of the situation. He couldn't be bothered to continue enjoying the delicious steamed fish. He took out a ruby from his pocket and tossed it to Fate. He brought along 2 servants and headed straight for the stables. Soon, the 3 of them galloped towards the central lake on their horses, disappearing into the night. The news of the impending war made everyone lose their appetite. Elsa quickly finished the food on her plate and pulled her daughter's hand, hiding in her room without looking back. In comparison, Chloe was much calmer. Not only did she eat twice as much as usual, but she also took her rapier and went straight to the basement to learn from her swordsmanship teacher, Liz. The adventure in the maze had broadened her horizons, especially the army of shadow creatures under the control of the black-robed man at the end. They were far more terrifying than any living thing, so she didn't take the 10,000 monsters seriously at all. After another hour, as Buzz led the fully armed cavalry into the castle, everyone felt the tension in the air. The servants in charge of training and feeding the hounds loosened the leashes and let them patrol the corridors and sewers. As soon as they noticed the slightest movement, they would immediately bark nonstop. The main purpose of this was to prevent any thieves from sneaking in and creating chaos or quietly opening the door. After all, the hounds were very sensitive to smell. Even if the thief was in stealth mode, it would be difficult to fool them. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, midnight came. Chapter 252. Andre, who was standing on the top floor of the castle, looked at the large fire that suddenly appeared in the distance. He smiled and said to Nina, "They're here. Let's go. Let's go and meet the soul shaman you mentioned. His power is very dangerous. You'd better be careful," Nina reminded in a low voice. Andre smiled indifferently. "Haha, don't worry. I've seen people who are 1,000 times more dangerous than him. This is nothing." Buzz narrowed his eyes and stared at the barbarians approaching the castle wall. He held the hilt of his curved sword tightly and asked in a low voice, "Master, do you need me to send 50 of my brothers to follow you in case of any accidents?" Andre shook his head gently. "No need. These barbarians can't hurt me. Besides, it's very dangerous to lower the drawbridge at this time. You'd better let everyone stay where they are and maintain their level. Besides, there are only 2 of them, right?" After saying that, he stroked the black crystal on the ring with his finger and immediately activated the teleportation ability on it. In a short moment, he was teleported from the top of the castle to an open space 200 meters away. The night breeze brushed against his skin, bringing a hint of coolness. Although it was already spring and the temperature during the day could even reach about 24 degrees, the night was still very cold, probably less than 10 degrees. In addition, the mountain wind was a little strong, so Andre, who was only wearing a magician's robe, felt very uncomfortable. However, he didn't have time to go back and change because an old man and a young barbarian were standing less than 5 meters away. Neither of them spoke first. They just stared at each other like this, as if they were competing for patience instead of negotiating. This strange situation lasted for a full 10 minutes. In the end, the old man sighed slightly and said in a very helpless tone, "Young man, it seems that you have extraordinary patience and perseverance, and your level is not low either. It's hard to imagine who could teach a little monster like you. Thank you for the compliment, but it's a little too early for you to call me a monster. In the vast land of the South, there are countless people who are stronger than me. The reason why you think I'm difficult to deal with is because your vision is too narrow. It's like a frog in a well. It can only see the sky as big as the mouth of the well. In its eyes, that's all there is to the world. In addition, I want to remind you before the negotiation begins. Don't take advantage of your seniority. Your little tricks are useless against me because I already have a lot of trump cards. They are so powerful that they are beyond your imagination. I only need to stretch out a finger to crush a self-righteous old man like you to death." After saying that, a cold smile appeared on Andre's face. His sharp gaze was like a knife, directly stabbing into the old man's chest. The reason why he was so aggressive was that he was running out of time, and he did not want to waste time arguing. If he could not solve the problem of the barbarians quickly, he would not be able to stabilize the rear before the monster arrived. Therefore, he had to be aggressive and let the barbarians feel his impatience. Before the old man could say anything, the young barbarian warrior beside him opened his eyes wide and roared, "Despicable Magus! How dare you disrespect witch Dr. Tutumanka? I want—" Before he could finish speaking, he suddenly realized that Andre, who was standing in front of him, had disappeared. The next second, he was kicked hard behind his knee, and the back of his head was hit hard. He lost his balance and knelt on the ground with a thud. He then felt a chill on his neck and saw a long sword glowing with dark red light resting on his shoulder. If he had moved slightly to the left, it would have easily pierced his neck. "You'd better behave yourself. Otherwise, I don't mind making sure that you can never open your stinking mouth again. Remember, if I hear any more disrespectful words, you and your people will become history. The orcs and goblins won't even need to do anything. I will personally send all of you to the embrace of the Grim Reaper." After Andre finished speaking, he gave the barbarian a hard kick and sheathed his longsword. In the blink of an eye, he had returned to the position he had just occupied. He knew that if he wanted to subdue the barbarians for his own use, he had to suppress their arrogance, especially that inexplicable sense of superiority. He could not allow even a trace of it to remain. The proud barbarian leader obviously could not stand such humiliation. He quickly got up from the ground, and without another word, pulled out his weapon and prepared to fight. But before he could take a step forward, Tutu Manka, who had been watching coldly from the sidelines, pulled him back and shook his head gently. "Forget it, Wharton. You're no match for him. Even if you rush up, you'll only be toyed with. Don't waste your energy. We're here to negotiate, not to fight." Wharton's face was red with agitation. He stuttered and growled, But he just insulted you. At the same time, he insulted me. My child, first of all, you have to understand that we are now in a life and death situation. As long as the tribe can continue to survive, even death is nothing to be afraid of, let alone a little insult. If you want to be a qualified leader, then perseverance and calmness are the qualities you must possess. The old man taught his student very calmly, and there was not a trace of anger on his wrinkled face. According to barbarian tradition, when there was an abnormal change of power in the tribe, the witch doctor with the highest status would automatically become the new leader's teacher, teaching him how to become a qualified leader. During this time, the new leader would have to unconditionally obey all of the teacher's orders. Therefore, although Wharton was very unwilling, he still suppressed his anger, gritted his teeth, and put away his weapon. He stood there without saying a word. Seeing such an interesting scene, the corners of Andre's mouth curled up slightly, and he laughed playfully. Huh, well said. A long time ago, a scholar once said a very philosophical sentence. In this cruel world, only those who survive can win everything. Those so-called idiots who choose to die with honor are just a bunch of pathetic losers. Tutumanka nodded in agreement. Yes, there is only hope and a future if you live. It is because of this that we have come today to hear your conditions. My conditions are very simple. All barbarians will join my territory and become my people. In return, I will be responsible for providing you with shelter and enough food to fill your stomachs. I can even give you some cattle and sheep to graze in the surrounding wilderness. In return, the adult barbarians must fight for me. Chapter 253. Without any hesitation, Andre directly stated his conditions. Although he knew that it was almost impossible for the arrogant barbarians to accept this, as the saying went, raise the price on the spot, then return the money on the spot. During negotiations, he would first offer a more outrageous price, then lower it bit by bit to let the other party feel that he had taken advantage of them. Thus, he would achieve his true goal. Similar techniques have been used many times on Earth, but it should be enough to deal with the barbarians who had a relatively primitive way of thinking. Impossible. The noble children of the forest would rather choose death than become the slave of an evil wizard. Wharton, who had been holding his breath, couldn't hold it in any longer and let out an angry roar. The old man comforted the irritable young warrior and stared at Andre with a very serious expression. He said in a rather heavy tone, "Young man, you are too greedy. You actually want to take advantage of the situation. This is not good. You don't understand the way of the barbarian tribes at all. We belong to nature, and we belong to the forest where the spirits of our ancestors float." Andre, who had already prepared himself for rejection, pretended to shrug his shoulders helplessly. "All right, then I'll take a step back. All barbarians must serve me for 5 years, and then you can take those who are willing to follow you back to the forest. However, there is one condition. You are not allowed to force them, and I will not use any means to force them to stay. In the end, those who are unwilling to leave will automatically become my people. At the same time, we must also sign an agreement to help each other in times of need." 5 years, Tutumunka muttered to himself in a low voice, his brows furrowed as he seriously considered the gains and losses. After a full 5 minutes, he finally reluctantly nodded. "All right. However, I must add one more condition. When we leave, you must provide a portion of food and weapons." In the eyes of the old man, 5 years was enough for the 11 or 12-year-old children to grow up into qualified barbarian warriors. By then, with the help of weapons and armor made by humans, it would be no problem for them to return to the forest for revenge. However, he obviously didn't know that a farming civilization had an extremely terrifying ability to assimilate a hunting civilization. This was especially true for those children whose worldview, values, and outlook on life had not yet been fixed. This had been proven countless times on Earth. As long as Andre could let all the barbarians experience the benefits of herding and farming in these 5 years, he was afraid that the other party wouldn't even be able to take a fifth of the people away. Once the lowly women obtained their freedom, they would definitely not be willing to continue to be unscrupulously controlled by the men. Staying would become the inevitable choice. If there were no women, how could a tribe survive? How could they develop? It could be said that after Tutumunka agreed to this condition, he had pushed the entire tribe into a sweet trap. The last barbarians in the border forest would slowly be assimilated within 5 years, and finally be integrated into the civilized world, becoming a trump card in Andre's hands. In fact, from the first time he saw the barbarians, they had a straightforward personality, excellent physique, and super endurance. They were simply born warriors. Coupled with the primitive spirit of martial arts and the pursuit of glory, with a little training, they would become the most elite heavy infantry. Of course, the prerequisite was that they had to get rid of their bad habit of fighting alone. Once he thought of the scene of the barbarians in tight formation slowly advancing. A trace of anticipation appeared on Andre's face. He smiled and extended his right hand. I accept your additional conditions, but I also have an additional condition. In these 5 years, all barbarian warriors must receive training and fight for me. If you agree, then shake my hand. If you don't, then please turn around and leave. The young barbarian leader, Wharton, curled his lips in disdain. We are the most outstanding warriors. All of us have superb martial arts. We don't need any training. Even though he had suffered a great loss at the hands of Andre, that was the power of magic. He didn't think that a magus could defeat him in pure hand-to-hand combat. In response to Wharton's rebuttal, Andre didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed heartily. Ha ha, perhaps what you say makes sense. You are indeed brave and skilled in battle, but that's only when you fight alone. Think about the few times you've clashed with the army of Lincoln City. When have you not returned in defeat? Remember, an army and individual courage are two different things. Before you are strong enough to fight against an entire army, formation, discipline, and excellent equipment are the most powerful guarantees of victory. What I'm about to teach you is the true way of war. He's right, my young leader. Now go shake his hand. We won't lose out by forming an alliance with a powerful and intelligent wizard. Tutu Monka gave Wharton a light push, his clear eyes shining with the light of wisdom. Under the gaze of the old man, Wharton unwillingly took 2 steps forward. He reached out his rough and powerful hand and firmly shook it. He said in a very serious tone, I swear on behalf of the last barbarian tribe in the border forest, from now on, until today, 5 years later, we willingly accept your rule and obey your leadership. I also swear that I will provide you with sufficient food and shelter in these 5 years. Andre mimicked Wharton's tone and made a promise. He was very clear that even though it was only a verbal vow, with the barbarian's personality that valued promises and honor, there was almost no possibility of them going back on their word unless there was a major change. The next thing they had to consider was how to deal with the incoming goblin and orc army. After an unfriendly handshake, the atmosphere became much more relaxed. Both sides understood what this alliance meant to them. The barbarians had escaped from their precarious lives and had a place where they could live and reproduce temporarily. They didn't have to starve or freeze, and they didn't have to worry about the possibility of an army from Lincoln City. On the other hand, Andre took advantage of this opportunity to gain an important force. More than 10,000 women and children would become qualified laborers, and the agriculture and animal husbandry in his territory would develop rapidly. More than 500 adult barbarian warriors could rival 3 times the number of human soldiers. In addition to more than 350 cavalrymen, the military power in his hands could be ranked in the top 10 of all the nobles in Lincoln City. He only lacked a few generals who could command the troops in battle. However, the combination of a wizard, a bard, and a druid wasn't weak at all. In fact, it was even stronger. Chapter 254. Of course, now there was also a soul shaman whose strength was unknown. A total of 4 spellcasters gathered in a remote territory. Perhaps even the 4 dukes who held great power would be extremely jealous if they knew. Although there were dozens of mages and a similar number of priests in Linden City, they were not loyal to any particular family. The priests, in particular, would always obey the god they served, followed by the church, and then the city hall. Unless the priest was a member of a noble family, they would never be recruited by the nobles. The mages, on the other hand, were creatures of profit. At most, they would maintain some close cooperation, and pledging loyalty was wishful thinking. Otherwise, there would not be such an abnormal organization like the Association of Mages that was independent of the administrative system. Since they had formed an alliance, Andre did not intend to guard against the barbarians. He waved his hand and signaled for the guards in the castle to lower the drawbridge, inviting the barbarians inside for a discussion. The young barbarian leader, Wharton, did not hesitate to lead 500 barbarian warriors, women, and children into the castle. The head of internal affairs, Abner, did not even have time to sleep. He quickly ordered his subordinates to set up a large number of tents at the back. In the end, there were not even enough tents, so they could only start a bonfire. Fortunately, the barbarians were not picky. Even the women were exceptionally strong, and it did not matter if they slept on the ground for a few nights. Thus, the chaotic scene was soon over, and all of them slept beside the warm bonfire. It could be seen that they were used to obeying the leadership of men. Although there was confusion in their eyes and fear for the future, they did not have the slightest intention of resisting. They were rather docile throughout the entire process. After settling down the large number of barbarian women and children, Abner immediately returned to the hall and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He smiled bitterly and complained, "Sir, it is a good thing to have enough manpower, but there are too many of them. We are severely lacking in resources. Food is not a problem, but the key is the lack of daily necessities, such as iron pots, tents, and tools. We also need large amounts of cloth. They need to bathe as soon as possible and change out of those dirty animal skins. Otherwise, I can't stand that damn smell." The Chief of Internal Affairs' words made Wharton blush a little. He stuttered as he explained, "We are barbarians, children of the forest. It's okay to sleep on the ground. And we don't need too many things. Just a pot to boil soup will do." Looking at the young barbarian leader's uneasy expression, the corners of Andre's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a playful smile. He joked, "Oh, my friend, that's not right." After all, what Abner had mentioned earlier were all necessities. Since they were necessities, they had irreplaceable uses. For example, the iron pot can provide a small amount of iron to the body when cooking soup. Iron is an important part of the human body's blood. The tent can effectively prevent mosquito bites. Trust me, the germs that these little things carry are not good. Maintaining a clean personal hygiene can effectively prevent many diseases. Finally, the tools can greatly increase production efficiency. Sir, you are absolutely right. I think we will need to spend a large sum of money to purchase some things from the city. According to my estimates, we will need at least 1,000 iron pots, 500 large tents, sickles, axes, saws, hoes, and other farming tools. We will also need to purchase a large number of tools for herding. I estimate that it will cost at least tens of thousands of gold coins." The old and shrewd Abner quickly reported a price that was more than 10 times the actual price. In any case, the barbarians living in the forest had no way of knowing the price of goods. The higher the price, the more the other party would feel that they owed him. Actually, an ordinary iron pot only cost 5 silver coins each. The tents, on the other hand, were slightly more expensive at around 10 gold coins. Adding on the various tools and cheap linen, it would not exceed 20,000 gold coins at most. It was the perfect price to use to earn a favor. This was because to the barbarians, these were things that they normally wanted but could not obtain at all. This was especially true for metal products. Many cities imposed strict restrictions on the sale of metal products to the surrounding primitive tribes. Therefore, when they obtained metal products, they would not use them as tools. Instead, they would simply process them and turn them into crude weapons. Generally speaking, most of the barbarians and monsters in the forest wielded wooden mallets and clubs filled with the teeth of ferocious beasts. Only warriors with outstanding performance had the right to obtain metal weapons. Due to the extremely humid environment in the rainforest, weapons would usually rust after a short period of time. Therefore, metal was an extremely precious and scarce resource to the barbarians. Unless it was a large tribe that had close ties with smuggling caravans, ordinary small to medium-sized tribes could only use bones and stones as a substitute. Andre pretended to be generous and said, "It's fine. Send out a carrier pigeon and ask Board to buy some from Linton City. I'm a generous person, and I will never mistreat my allies." Mr. Wizard, thank you very much for your generosity. However, I feel that instead of spending so much money on women and children, it would be better to give our warriors better weapons. Wharton stood up from his chair excitedly as he spoke. Andre did not reply immediately. Instead, he turned his head and smiled at Tutumanka, who was sitting beside him. He knew that the one who could make the decision among the barbarians was this old man, and not the hot-blooded young chieftain. Tutumanka looked at the excited Wharton helplessly and nodded slightly. If you have the energy to spare, take out some weapons and armor. After all, these warriors will be fighting for you for the next 5 years. I promise you that you will receive sufficient compensation. With his life experience, he naturally knew that the young chieftain had been set up by a group of people. However, since things had come to this, he had to pay a price. Otherwise, when the war was imminent, he could not let his warriors fight the enemy with crude weapons. There are still some weapons and armor stored in the warehouse. If you need them, just go and get them from Abner. Also, I hope to receive some detailed information about the soul shaman as compensation. Is that okay with you? Andre leaned forward slightly and asked tentatively. It was obvious that the soul shaman who had control over the soul essence and soul energy had piqued his interest, especially the ability to directly control and harm spirit creatures. It sounded a little unbelievable. Chapter 255. Of course, the path of the soul isn't a secret, and I'm willing to share it with others. However, this path is more difficult than most known professions, and the more intelligent a person is, the harder it is for them to persevere. The old man's eyes shone with a meaningful light as he spoke. Andre smiled and spread out his hands. It's all right. I don't intend to become a soul shaman. I just want to understand the profession. After all, the soul is the most important and mysterious part of all creatures. Soul shamans seem to have a unique understanding of the soul. I believe you can satisfy my curiosity, right? Just to satisfy the curiosity of a wizard? Tutumanka's mouth twitched slightly as he asked in a low voice. What else do you think it is? Do you think I can decipher the secrets of the soul shaman with just 1 or 2 conversations? Andre half-jokingly kicked the ball back to Tutumanka. Tutumanka was very confident in himself. He shook his head slightly. No, I've never doubted that. Even the most talented person would need at least 5 to 10 years to become a soul shaman. They would have to use their own soul to communicate with all kinds of spirits and spirits. The slightest mistake would cause them to be devoured by the raging spirits and turn them into complete idiots. Let's end this topic here. It's better for us to discuss how to deal with those damned orcs and goblins. No problem. I've never lacked patience. Once we've solved the problem at hand, we'll discuss the secrets of the soul together. However, before we get to the main topic, I want to know what happened in the border forest. How did the incomparably powerful barbarian tribe fall into such dire straits? Seeing that the old man didn't want to talk about this topic, Andre didn't force him. He immediately changed the topic to a more sensitive one. Although he already had a rough guess in his heart, he still wanted to hear the personal experience of the person involved. For example, what kind of person could unite so many monster tribes? What was their goal? Was it a precursor to a large-scale invasion of the barbarians? All in all, as a lord at the forefront, he had to be prepared for the worst. I think it's better for Wharton to tell you this. He had just returned from hunting when the disaster happened, and saw the hellish scene with his own eyes. After Tutumanka finished speaking, he pushed the young barbarian leader from behind. Unconcealable anger and hatred appeared on his aged face. Wharton's face didn't look any better. He clenched his fists tightly and gritted his teeth. Finally, he raised his fist and slammed it on the hardwood table. He roared fiercely. Those despicable kobolds first dug a tunnel underground. Then countless goblins, gnomes, and half-orcs rushed out from the tunnel. They didn't care whether they were male or female, old or young. They killed everyone they saw and set fire everywhere. In just a dozen minutes, our resistance was crushed. I was the only one who was lucky enough to survive out of a tribe of 2,000 people. Not only us, but all the barbarian tribes in the border forest suffered the same fate. The 10,000 women, children, and 500 warriors you see now are actually a temporary team formed by small groups of survivors. I'm afraid these are the only barbarians left in the border forest. After hearing the news, Andre gasped and asked in surprise, "How many monsters are there? Did they attack all the barbarian tribes on the same day? Do you know who planned all this?" Although he always liked to pretend to be a wise man who didn't panic in the face of chaos, he couldn't keep his calm at this moment. His whole body became incomparably nervous. Not only did his breathing become rapid, but the index finger of his left hand also twitched slightly. If the people of Lonely Mountain Town saw this scene, they would immediately hide far away. Because most people knew that once the ace hunter of the town showed these two movements, he was in an extremely bad mood. The terrible anger accumulated in his heart was about to erupt. Whether it was a terrifying beast or an arrogant person who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, they would soon face a disaster. Obviously, most barbarians couldn't answer the question of numbers. They even had to deal with more than 10 goods one by one, let alone count the number of enemies in the midst of chaos. The old man took a deep breath and answered in a very sorrowful voice. There were 700,000 barbarians living in the west of the border forest, but they were all attacked in less than a month. Every time, it was a tragic massacre. Some of the refugees from the large tribes even claimed to have seen ogres and giants. I believe that as a mage, you should understand what this means, right? Of course, all the monsters in the border forest have been united again. Although I don't know the specific reason, I think there are only two possibilities. The first is that another powerful monster has appeared in the forest and intends to launch an all-out attack on Linton City and the surrounding areas. It wants to establish a regime made up entirely of monsters, and humans will become their slaves. The second is that a schemer has planned all of this. Perhaps it's an inland lord who holds a grudge against Linton City, or perhaps it's... At this point, Andre suddenly remembered that he'd met a half-orc mercenary called Cass on the road not long ago. He seemed to have said that he was going to the border forest to complete a mission. The timing was exactly the same. Once he thought that someone had secretly hidden an army of monsters in the border forest, his face was instantly filled with haze. He knew that the person controlling the army was very likely the mastermind behind the plot to overthrow Linton City. This also meant that it would be much more difficult for him to win this game. What could it be? I feel like you've remembered something. Tutu Minka was keenly aware of the change in Andre's mood, and immediately stood up to ask loudly. The hatred that was engraved in his bones made this originally benevolent old man look extremely ferocious. The spirit of the giant bear loomed behind him, its withered hands covered in a layer of energy. It actually scratched a very deep claw mark on the hardwood table. Andre took a deep breath and gently rubbed between his eyebrows. His expression was solemn as he replied, "I'm not sure yet, but I think this matter is related to a powerful enemy." Chapter 256. Tutu Manka suppressed his anger, glaring at Leyland with bloodshot eyes. "Who is he? Why is he doing this to us?" "I'm sorry, I still don't know who this person is, but I've clashed with his subordinates many times in secret. The only thing I'm sure of is that he's very powerful. With your current strength, you can't even protect yourselves, let alone take revenge. Give up on those unrealistic thoughts and think a way to get through this crisis first. We'll talk about the future later." Andre didn't know how to explain the identity and background of the mastermind to these two people who had been blinded by hatred. Could he tell them that their enemy was an apprentice of a legendary lich? If he really did that, he wasn't sure how the old lich behind the scenes would react. Therefore, he could only appease the old lich first. At the very least, before he completely controlled the other barbarians, nothing must happen to these two. Tutu Manka took a few deep breaths and finally managed to suppress his anger. He nodded vigorously and said, "Very good. Since you're his enemy, I believe that with your intelligence, you'll be able to uncover this executioner sooner or later. Promise me that if you know his identity, you'll tell me immediately." "No problem. I promise that if I know his identity, I'll inform you immediately." Without any hesitation, Andre agreed to the old man's request. Taking revenge for the people who had died tragically was a matter of course. He had no reason to stop them, and at the same time, he couldn't stop them. Otherwise, they would definitely treat him as an enemy. Forgiveness was easy to say, but no one would be able to do it one day. Unless they didn't have the ability, they would all embark on the path of revenge without hesitation. In essence, Andre was a person who advocated revenge. If someone dared to hurt his family and friends, he wouldn't hesitate to take revenge. He would use all the resources and power he had to make them sink into a quagmire. Then, he would use even crueler methods to kill his enemies' family and friends one by one. He would let them experience the most painful things in life, and then completely wipe them from the body to the soul. Thank you. I owe you one. Tutu Monka's expression was incomparably serious when he said this. Anyone could see that he had made a promise that had to be repaid with his life. The young barbarian leader Wharton also thumped his own chest and roared, Magus, if you can find out who that bastard is, I swear in the name of my ancestors that all the barbarians in the border forest will become your allies. Thank you for your trust. I promise that if I have the chance, I'll make this person pay the price in blood. But before that, we need to collect some interest from his minions. We need to make sure that these 10,000 monsters don't return alive. After saying that, Andre stood up, took out the dagger he always carried with him, and stabbed it into a simple map. He pointed at the place where the dagger had pierced and spoke in a chilling voice. This place is only 10 kilometers away from Tue's Valley. It's a large wasteland. There's a lone peak on the left, a forest on the right, and a mountain stream behind us. There's only a suspension bridge connecting the two sides. I have a plan that can kill all 10,000 goblins and orcs, but I need everyone's cooperation. As long as we can kill these bastards, I'm willing to do anything, even if I lose the chance to kiss a wild boar's butt. Wharton gritted his teeth and promised. Buzz slammed the table heavily as well. Master, we've been training strictly for more than a month. It's time to test the results. Seeing that the two of them had expressed their stance, Andre immediately nodded in satisfaction. Very good. I'll start assigning tasks now. Remember, you can ask if there's anything you don't understand, but you must follow my instructions to the letter. Otherwise, don't blame me for being merciless. Hee. You don't have to worry about that. You should know how strict our discipline is now. Even the warhorses won't make a single sound once the order is given. Buzz revealed a smug expression. Wharton turned his head and glanced at the barbarian warriors under him. He suddenly felt a little guilty and stammered. I'll try my best. Not try your best. You have to do it. You have to restrain your men on the battlefield, especially when you send out the signal to stand your ground. You can't go out on your own. You have to stay where you are like nails and not move at all. There's no room for negotiation. Andre's tone was resolute and decisive. He didn't give Wharton a chance to retort. One had to know that the barbarian warriors were brave in battle, but they didn't cherish their lives at all. This was especially so when they activated their berserk abilities. They were in a state where they didn't recognize anyone. Even their own father would be attacked as long as they were close to them. Just imagine the scene of hundreds of lunatics wielding weapons crazily killing in a crowd. They usually didn't end up being killed by the enemy, but by their own men. Ever since the Alliance, Andre had regarded the 500 barbarian warriors as part of his assets. He would feel heartache if any of them died, so he wouldn't allow them to risk their lives. Therefore, he had to ensure that these guys listened to his orders. This way, he could use tactics to obtain the greatest victory with the least cost. In fact, he didn't intend to fight the enemy head-on from the beginning. After all, although the goblins were known as the trash among the monsters, their physique was only a little worse than humans. It was just that their strength and height were a little worse. If they had an advantage in numbers, the threat would be quite terrifying. Most importantly, these destructive little monsters were followed by the half-orcs. They were one of the strong races that weren't inferior to the barbarians. They were smarter than the orcs and stronger than humans, fully demonstrating the so-called advantages of being mixed blood. They were also proficient in using all kinds of weapons. It was said that some half-orc tribes even reared giant wolves. They were large magical beasts that were very similar to winter wolves. Not only did they have the intelligence of a human, but they could also speak. They knew how to use many cunning tactics. When they worked together with the half-orcs, it was a match made in heaven. Chapter 257. Under Andre's forceful pressure, Wharton could only promise that he would take care of every barbarian warrior and make sure they followed his orders to the letter. However, whether or not they could really do it was still a question mark. After all, these guys were famous for being free and undisciplined. Otherwise, they wouldn't have lost to human soldiers who were much weaker than them in large-scale battles time and time again, even though they had excellent physical fitness and combat skills. Normally speaking, an adult barbarian warrior could easily defeat 3 to 5 Lincoln City soldiers. They were slightly stronger than a rank 1 warrior in the human world, especially in terms of strength, endurance, jumping ability, climbing ability, running ability, and so on. But why did they always lose in large-scale battles? The answer was simple. These muscle-brained barbarians always placed too much emphasis on individual bravery. They didn't care about formations, discipline, and tactics that could increase their chances of victory. As for arcane magic, they viewed it as a scourge. They would rather die in battle than accept the help of magic. It was important to know that formations had always been a very important part of war in the era of cold weapons. Not only could it help the weak win against the strong, it could also maximize the advantages of one's own troops. From a certain perspective, a team without a formation couldn't be called an army at all. In a situation of equal numbers and combat power, a professional army with a formation could easily defeat a motley crew without a formation. Even though the barbarians' physique and combat power were much higher than ordinary human soldiers, it would be a miracle if they could win against the Lincoln City army with formations, crossbows, divine spells, and magical bombardment. After making the promise, Wharton, who valued his reputation, immediately turned to his subordinates to emphasize this matter. He didn't want to see his own men make fools of themselves on the battlefield. After all, Buzz had already shown a faint sense of superiority. As a proud barbarian, he didn't want to lose this silent contest. At least, he couldn't lose too badly. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to raise his head in the future. As the supreme ruler of the Two-Ways Valley, Andre didn't care about the hidden competition between the barbarians and the Brant cavalry. He directly let Abner bring the barbarians to the warehouse to pick out weapons and armor. He sat on a chair and silently looked at the map hanging on the wall. His eyes flashed with a cruel light as he thought about what he should do to leave a deep impression on his opponents. He wanted his enemies to tremble at the thought of this and not dare to pry into his territory so easily. He knew very well that war never existed alone. Although it was sometimes driven by hatred, it was still an extension of politics. It was to fight for the right to redistribute resources. This had never changed since ancient times, and it was no exception even in the magical world. As a smart man, Andre knew very well what he wanted to express in this sudden war. He wanted to clearly divide his territory and let everyone know that if anyone touched his cake, they would be met with retribution. As the saying went, fear and reverence were always the most powerful guarantee for the strong to establish their position. It was like the big fish eating the small fish in the food chain. If you didn't want to be eaten, you had to show the nature of a carnivore. Otherwise, the other carnivorous animals wouldn't recognize your control of the hunting ground. Although it was already 2 in the morning, he still didn't feel sleepy. His brain was working at full speed. After a full 10 minutes, he suddenly waved at Abner. The latter didn't dare to delay. He hurried forward and bowed slightly. "Sir, how can I help you? How many bulls do we have now?" Andre lowered his voice and asked. "Bulls?" Abner was stunned for a moment. He quickly opened the account book in his hand and looked through it. He replied in a low voice, "Sir, according to your request, we bought a total of more than 5,000 cows. Most of them are cows, and there are less than 600 bulls. Some of them are for breeding, while the rest are for slaughter. Why do you ask?" The corner of Andre's mouth rose slightly. He sneered and explained, "My dear director, imagine if a herd of bulls with daggers tied to their horns suddenly charged out from the side of the forest when two armies were fighting. What kind of scene would that be? Oh, oh, my goodness. The god of knowledge above. This idea of yours is simply brilliant. First, let the enemy cross the mountain stream. Then, lure the enemy into a formation on the wide plains. When the enemy is unprepared, let the frenzied bulls attack from the side. Finally, you lead the cavalry and barbarians in pursuit. This is simply a genius idea. Abner was so excited that he was dancing with joy. In his opinion, using a few hundred bulls to defeat 10,000 invading monsters was simply too worth it. After all, this was a barbarian army made up of goblins and half-orcs. As long as they could annihilate them this time, he believed that no one or monster would dare to covet the riches of Tua's Valley for a long time. It was equivalent to solving the biggest problem once and for all. Although there are some differences in the details, it's more or less the same. Besides, I'm just borrowing this method. It's someone else who invented it. Oh, right, don't forget to brush the bull's tail with oil. It's said that this can make the bull more ferocious. Having said that, Andre stood up and stretched his sore body. He turned to return to his room on the second floor to rest. However, just as he reached the stairs, the winter wolf Michelle, who had been napping on the felt, suddenly opened her eyes. She revealed a cunning smile and asked in a low voice, "Human, I have a suggestion. Do you want to hear it?" Andre stopped in his tracks and raised his eyebrows slightly. "Let's hear it." Actually, there are many wild wolves living at the edge of the forest. There are about 50 to 70 of them. If you're willing to provide me with a delicious sheep every day, I'll make a trip to gather the wolves. Michelle laughed sinisterly as she laid out her conditions. "No problem. I agree to your request. Now go gather the wolves." Andre agreed without even thinking. According to the current prices in Linton City, a sheep was only worth 1 gold coin. 100 sheep would be 100 gold coins. Of course, there might be some transportation fees in between. It was a huge profit to exchange for dozens of ferocious wild wolves. Chapter 258. He had always had a headache over how to control the direction of the charge of the bulls. Now that he had a wolf pack, it was like someone had sent him a pillow just as he was about to doze off. In the history of Earth, there were not many cases of using a herd of bulls to charge an opponent, and even fewer cases of success. It was said that sometimes, when a herd of bulls was startled, they would not charge forward. Instead, they would crash into each other on the spot, resulting in heavy casualties. However, if there was a wolf pack to drive them forward, the result would be completely different. I knew you were a generous fellow. Prepare 100 sheep. I will be able to gather the wolves quickly. After saying that, Michelle greedily licked her teeth and immediately went out of the sewer. Not long after, she heard a series of wolf howls coming from outside. It was obvious that the winter wolf was issuing a call to the surrounding wolves. Normally, wolves that did not have much ability to think would not be able to resist such a call. This was because the winter wolf's size, strength, agility, and speed were far superior to normal wolves. Not to mention, they also had the terrifying frost spray. Even the highly intelligent wargs did not dare to face them head-on. Through the window on the first floor, Andre watched Michelle's figure gradually disappear into the distance. He squinted his eyes and muttered to himself, "Now, everything is finally ready. All we have to do is wait for the enemy to come to us. Hopefully, there won't be any accidents." There was a saying that went, "Victory is always reserved for those who are prepared." He had already made all the preparations and was 80% confident that he could achieve his goal. As for the last 20%, he would leave it to luck to decide. War was a game filled with drama. It was impossible to achieve a 100% victory rate. No one knew if they would be the victor until the very last moment. This was especially true for wars in the era of cold weapons. Often, one or two seemingly insignificant factors would trigger an uncontrollable and violent change. Compared to war with firearms and bullets, war relied more on the illusory concept of morale. As long as morale was high, even a few hundred people could defeat tens of thousands of enemies. Once morale collapsed, Even an army of hundreds of thousands would be no more than a flock of sheep waiting to be slaughtered. The only thing Andre could do was to do his best and leave the rest to fate. He kept increasing the bargaining chips for his side and minimized the chances of accidents. That was all. Anyone who participated in a war for the first time would be involuntarily nervous. Although he had killed people before and experienced a defensive battle, it was still his first time fighting with the enemy in the wild. Fortunately, no matter how nervous he was, he couldn't resist the sleepiness. After returning to his room, he lay on his bed and fell asleep in a daze. At the same time, in a basement of Linton City, the half-orc Cass was sitting at a table, drinking from a cup of wine as he reported, "Master, I've completely eradicated the barbarians, as you requested. Right now, they only have a group of women and children left. Lars is leading an army to pursue them. There should be good news tomorrow or the day after." "Very good. You've done a good job. Remember, don't provoke that young mage in the Tua's Valley. His identity is a lot more complicated than you can imagine. When you go back, help me deliver this invitation to him. Directly tell him my real name." After the man in the cloak finished speaking, he took out a black invitation card. There was a pattern of a scorpion's tail on the wax seal. Without a doubt, he had received the Lich's notice and understood that Andre was playing the role of his opponent in this game. He was unusually excited, and even the corners of his mouth maintained a smile. "Don't worry. I've told Lars not to let him near the Tua's Valley. As for this invitation, it will be delivered to him in 5 days at the latest." The half-orc warrior did not attempt to ask for the reason, because he had seen with his own eyes how many fellows who tried to pry into his master's secrets ended up dying miserably. Thus, doing his job well and waiting for his reward was the only way to survive. Amidst the intense preparations, a day and night passed just like that. 300 strong bulls entered their designated positions ahead of time. At the same time, Winter Wolf Michel gathered 60 ferocious wolves. They had their fill at the entrance of the castle and followed into the ambush area, silently waiting for the signal to attack. More than 500 barbarian warriors had obtained excellent weapons and armor from the warehouse. They were basically spoils of war from the previous victory over the Shift's tribe. As a large tribe, they obviously had close ties with smugglers. Many of them were standard equipment of the Linen Army. Although it looked a little messy to the warriors who still had clubs in their hands, it was like they had discovered a treasure. They all hung it on their bodies with all their might. Many of them had at least 4 weapons on their belts when they walked out of the warehouse, especially the specially made flying axes that were loved by everyone. They were all snatched up in an instant. It was important to note that when thrown at close range, as long as the force behind it was strong enough, it could even destroy an opponent's shield. Even if they were wearing helmets, the axes would still be embedded in their heads. There was almost no armor that could defend against it. It was obvious that such simple and crude weapons were very much to the barbarian warriors' liking. They even ate 2 more pieces of bread to celebrate. The young leader, Wharton, was so happy that his face was flushed red. He gulped down 2 large cups of ale and sat quietly by the campfire, waiting for the enemy to arrive. He could not wait to avenge his dead tribesmen. Unlike the messy appearance of the barbarian camp, the other side of the camp was unbelievably quiet. The cavalry from the kingdom of Brant were silently eating their food. After a month of strict training, they slowly understood what discipline and obedience were. Large numbers of heavy warhorses were leisurely eating oats and beans not far away. They looked exceptionally majestic. Perhaps it was because the Oleal continent was filled with magical energy, but some of the stallions here were born especially tall. The best of them could wear a vest and drag a fully armed feudal knight that weighed more than 200 kilograms as they charged forward. They could even run for 2 to 3 kilometers without a problem. Of course, these Brant cavalrymen weren't equipped with cumbersome full-body armor. They only wore breastplates, greaves, arm guards, and helmets, so their weight was relatively lighter. However, they were still equipped with heavy warhorses that weighed more than a ton. Regardless of whether it was long-range attacks or close combat, they weren't at a disadvantage. Chapter 259. Andre sighed softly as he looked at the elite cavalry that he had personally formed, and then glanced at the barbarians who were showing their true feelings. He mumbled to himself, "The feeling of waiting for war to come is the worst. I really hope those damn goblins and half-orcs appear soon." In order to ensure that the entire battle plan could be carried out smoothly, he had already arrived at the designated battlefield in advance. Not only had he scouted out the surrounding terrain, but he had also dug a large number of traps in both the lone peak on the left and the forest on the right. As long as the enemy dared to cross the suspension bridge, they were basically doomed. The only difference was whether they would choose to commit suicide by jumping down the mountain stream, be chopped into meat paste by the enraged barbarians, or die under the iron hooves, arrows, and scimitars of the cavalry. Just as Andre's patience was about to reach its limit, a small bird suddenly descended from the sky and landed on the motionless Nina's shoulder. It used its sharp beak to lightly tug at her hair and chirped for a while. The female elf, who had been resting with her eyes closed, suddenly opened them and said in a low voice, "Master, they have begun to cross the river." Druids had the ability to communicate with animals and command them to serve them. When necessary, they could even control all the animals in an entire forest to attack. Those who were fortunate enough to witness the Druid Conclave's rage would never be able to forget that terrifying scene for the rest of their lives. This was also why the rulers of the continent rarely provoked them. Is that so? It's a few hours earlier than expected. Looks like they are in a hurry. Otherwise, they wouldn't have taken the risk of marching in the evening. Having said that, Andre grabbed a small handful of peeled hazelnuts from a bag and scattered them on the ground. The gray bird tilted its head and looked at him, then immediately jumped to the ground and began to peck at the delicious dried fruits. It chirped from time to time, as if thanking the human for his generosity. Orcs and goblins both have night vision. Day and night don't make much of a difference to them. I think it's best if you get everyone to warm up. These fellows should reach the designated location in half an hour to 40 minutes at most, Nina reminded softly. Andre stretched out his finger and gently stroked the bird's soft feathers. He gently nodded. What a clever little thing. Go to the suspension bridge first. Wait until all of them have crossed the mountain stream before burning the bridge. Remember, don't get caught. I'm looking forward to seeing their desperate eyes. Understood. Nina nodded without hesitation. Then, she turned into a goshawk and soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, she was already in the air and gradually disappeared into the distance. After watching his followers leave, Andre stretched and stood up, shouting at everyone, "Guys, the picnic was over. Pack up your weapons and armor immediately and extinguish the bonfire. Cavalry, hide in the woods and wait for the signal to attack. The rest of you, pull the carts over and form a defensive line. Hurry up, you only have 20 minutes to prepare." Hearing these words, Wharton instantly threw away the wine glass in his hand. Breathing heavily, he growled, "Did you all hear that? Move immediately. The enemy who killed our clansmen will be here soon. Let them pay with their blood. Yes, blood for blood. Kill all these bastards. Break their bones one by one." The barbarian warriors, whose hearts were filled with brutality, picked up their weapons and echoed with emotion. If it weren't for the prohibition against loud noises, they would have been shouting at the top of their lungs. Their bloodshot eyes, in particular, sent chills down one's spine. Seeing this scene, Andre couldn't help but secretly frown. Several times, he wanted to say something, but when the words reached his mouth, he swallowed them back down. In the end, he could only let out a sigh. As a smart person who was controlled by reason and logic, he knew how terrible hatred was. It could turn originally kind people into demons, and it could make virtuous people become unscrupulous. The inextinguishable flame would continue to torture the soul until the revenge was successful. Of course, after the revenge was successful, it didn't mean that one would be free. What followed would be endless emptiness and self-blame, and it would completely turn this person into a body without a soul. But it was undeniable that hatred was a very powerful force. It could give people goals and beliefs, and it could make the cowardly brave. It could even unite countries that were full of contradictions, and in a very short period of time, it could explode with a powerful force. Even the gods couldn't ignore this point. However, the destruction caused by hatred was also huge. Countless families were broken because of it, and countless lives were lost because of it, especially those who were unscrupulous in seeking revenge. In order to achieve their goals, they didn't care about anything. Sometimes, several countries would be dragged into war because of their revenge plans. Although Andrei wanted to comfort these barbarians, after much consideration, he chose to give up. On one hand, their hatred for the monsters in the forest was too deep, and there was no way to resolve it. On the other hand, these warriors who were filled with hatred could often unleash 100% of their fighting strength in battle, and there was no need to worry about morale. To him, they were a force that was hard to come by. Without a doubt, between morality and benefits, Andrei selfishly chose the latter. This was because he was about to return to Linton City and start a battle of wills with the legendary Lich's apprentice. He had to strengthen his own strength as soon as possible. There was a good saying, the strong set the flag, and the weak set the team. If he didn't want to be a weakling who could be trampled on, then he had to establish a strong image before returning. A strong private army was an important standard, and the monsters that were about to enter the ambush were the target of his might. After the battle order was given, everyone quickly got into their roles. In just 10 minutes, the temporary camp was cleared. More than 30 wooden carts came across and surrounded a simple parapet. More than 500 barbarian warriors smeared mud on their bodies, pretending to be travel-worn. They looked as if they had been on the road for a day and were quietly warming up. Seeing that everyone was ready, Andrei went straight to the young barbarian leader and sternly reminded him, "Your mission is to attract as many enemies as possible, so you have to look tired. This line of defense looks like it's about to collapse. Don't go crazy and forget this, understand?" It seems that having too much knowledge is not a good thing. I think you should try to trust your own feelings sometimes because your senses are very sharp. Tutu Munka stroked his white hair and suggested with a laugh, "Believe in feelings?" Andrei's face showed a trace of surprise, but it only lasted for a few seconds before it turned into a helpless expression. "I'm sorry. Although my intuition has always been accurate, I can't rely on it to predict danger. I prefer to use rational analysis and the resources at hand to deal with all dangers." Obviously, as a person who had received a materialistic education for more than 10 years, his way of thinking was completely rational. Even in this world full of supernatural forces, he still believed that there was a physical and chemical explanation behind all mysterious phenomena. It was just that he wasn't strong enough to pry into the mystery behind it. Tutu Munka saw the stubbornness and conceit in Andrei's eyes, so he didn't continue to persuade him. He sighed regretfully. "Ah, what a pity. I thought you were a seed that could pass down the path of the soul, but unfortunately, you're not. You don't even have the slightest chance of becoming a soul shaman. Your way of looking at things is too objective, and you seriously lack self-awareness. It's impossible for you to be recognized by the essence and soul." Andrei shrugged nonchalantly. "I never thought I could become a soul shaman. I'm just a little interested in this profession, and I want to have a systematic understanding. As for looking for an apprentice, you'd better find someone else." Before he could finish his words, he suddenly felt a large number of chaotic footsteps in the distance. He hurriedly stuck half of his head out to take a look. He saw an army of goblins slowly appearing on the horizon in the distance. More and more of them followed, and there was no end in sight. These dirty little monsters were wearing worn-out leather armor. It seemed that they were modified from the corpses of the barbarians after they had conquered the barbarian tribes. The weapons in their hands were also slightly better than those of the goblin tribes in the wild. Behind them, there were a few earth goblins from the same goblin family. They were all wearing shiny helmets, and their metal armor was stained with dried blood. They looked murderous, and they kept waving the whips in their hands to drive away the ordinary goblins, forcing them to continue on their way. There was no formation, no command, only a strong pressure and a terrifying advantage in numbers. The scene was a complete mess. It had to be said that these fellows didn't deserve to be called an army. Even street brawls were more strategic than they were. Against such an enemy, one fierce wave of attacks would probably cause them to start trampling on each other in an instant. Just as Andre was about to let out a sigh of relief, 1,000 fully armed orcs suddenly appeared at the back of the army. They were all holding one-handed axes and shields, and almost every one of them had 1 or 2 dried human heads hanging from their waists. They looked unusually fierce. There was no need to ask to know that they were elite veterans who had been on the battlefield for a long time. As for those human heads, they were obviously cut off from the barbarian corpses. Only barbarians would tattoo their faces, and only barbarians would have strange hairstyles. Phew. So most of the goblins are just cannon fodder. These orcs are the ones that really need to be taken care of. Andre muttered to himself as he let out a breath of turbid air and narrowed his eyes. Tutu Munka pointed at a particularly tall half-orc wearing black full-body armor and holding a giant warhammer. He lowered his voice and reminded, "Be careful. This guy is a very powerful warrior. He directly shattered the ribs and heart of the #1 warrior of my tribe." Chapter 261. Thank you. I'll be very careful and won't give him a chance to get close. After saying that, Andre pulled open the pulley crossbow, quickly took out a poisoned arrow from the quiver, and gently inserted it into the groove. Throughout the entire process, he was extremely careful. This arrow was different from an ordinary arrow that was smeared with aconitum herb. This arrow was smeared with snake venom, spider venom, the essence extracted from the fruit of highly poisonous plants, and even the poison of the devilfish. It could be said that as long as one's skin was pierced by this terrible poisonous arrow, it would be very fatal. Once this arrow pierced the body, the victim would immediately feel great pain and torture. If one was lucky, one would die in about 1 to 5 minutes. However, if one's vitality was too tenacious, then the outcome would be much more miserable. Due to the poison of the devil fish, all the pain would be magnified by tens to hundreds of times. If a woman giving birth represented the highest level of pain, then the person shot by this arrow would be 2 levels higher. Andre had once experimented on a mouse, and the result made one's scalp tingle. This was because the mouse, which had been corroded by the poison, had gone crazy and rammed itself against the wall, eventually killing itself. He believed that if this arrow hit a person, and that person happened to have a weapon on him, he would definitely choose to commit suicide immediately. Of course, the cost of this arrow was not cheap. Just the various poisons alone cost 500 gold coins. In addition, the arrow was made of a special alloy, and the triangular arrowhead was extremely sharp. The cost of each arrow alone was 700 gold coins. So far, he had only made 5 arrows, and through magic, he ensured that the poison on them would never disappear. As a soul shaman who had lived in the primitive jungle for a long time, Tutuminka was no stranger to the poisons of various animals and plants. At a glance, he could see the colorful colors on the arrowhead. In an instant, his face changed greatly. He subconsciously took 2 steps back and cursed in a low voice. "Damn it! How many poisons did you smear on this arrow?" 9. This arrow has been soaked in 9 different poisons for half a month. In order to ensure that the toxins are active, I specially did some processing. The person shot by this arrow will definitely not live for more than 5 minutes. Andre described the origin of the poisonous arrow expressionlessly, his eyes shining with a chilling light. How terrifying. It's such a waste of your talent that you don't want to be a witch doctor. I can bet that even if all the witch doctors in the entire border forest were put together, they wouldn't be as good as you in concocting poisons. Finishing his words, the old man shivered with lingering fear and turned his attention back to the battlefield. Andre smiled faintly, silently cursing the other party for being a soul shaman, but pretending to be a witch doctor. Why did he have to preach to him? However, he did not say this out loud. He drank the invisibility potion, and his body quickly turned transparent. After a few seconds, he disappeared into thin air. Just as the two of them were conversing, the fast-moving monsters had already arrived less than 200 meters away from the barbarian warriors. They stopped and let out strange cries. The half-orc, who was wearing black armor and holding a war hammer, kicked away the goblins blocking his way and came to the front alone. He laughed sinisterly and shouted, "Ha ha! I really didn't expect that you cowards didn't run away. Instead, you delivered yourselves to me. How does it feel to be a stray dog? Now, I'll give you a chance to surrender. No matter who it is, as long as you crawl over here like a dog, I'll benevolently allow you to be my slave. How about it? Not bad, right? Heh. General Lars, you're truly too benevolent. If it were me, I wouldn't take in a bunch of cowards." Another half-orc viciously agreed. The half-orc called Lars stroked the thick beard on his chin and cracked open his mouth to reveal two sharp teeth. He teased, "Oh, Imsh, you have to understand that I've been constantly on the move recently. My boots are so dirty that you can't even tell their original color. I just happen to need a few stray dogs because they can use their tongues to lick the dirt and feces clean. Great God of Orcs knew. Your brain is simply too clever. So stray dogs can be used like this. Damn it. Looks like I'd better pick a couple of them later." After speaking, the half-orc called Imsh turned his head and looked ahead with a contemptuous gaze. He barked twice at the enraged barbarians. "Despicable scum, you dare to insult the noble barbarians. Just you wait, I'll immediately chop off your head." The red-eyed Wharton finally couldn't take it anymore. He fiercely raised his weapon and let out an angry roar. Lars didn't care about this verbal threat at all. Instead, he picked up a golden-haired skeleton from his belt and shook it. He laughed wildly. "Ha ha ha! Your useless father said the same thing to me back then. In the end, his head became part of my collection. You're no exception." When Wharton saw this skull, his entire person became incomparably malevolent. Veins popped out on his forehead, and tears of blood actually flowed out of his eyes. His entire body trembled uncontrollably. Without a doubt, this was his father's skull. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a huge reaction. When the other barbarians saw their leader's appearance, they all gripped their weapons and shields. They were only waiting for the order to charge out and fight to the death. Barbarians were resilient by nature, full of courage and perseverance. They were merciless towards their enemies and especially couldn't tolerate others looking down on them. As for insults, they didn't even need to mention it. Anyone with a little bit of adventuring experience knew that these barbarian warriors, who were stronger than normal people, would explode into a terrifying rage when they were treated unfairly. The end result would often be a large-scale brawl. Unlike most warrior professions that relied on good training to increase their battle strength, the barbarians relied completely on their wild instincts and innate abilities to enter into battle. When they entered into a berserk state, they would become many times stronger than usual. However, the price was that after a short period of berserk, they would become very tired. From a certain perspective, these muscular barbarians valued their honor and beliefs more than their lives. If someone offended what they valued, then they had to be prepared to pay with their lives. Of course, from another perspective, they were also easily provoked and would do some very reckless actions. As a cunning orc general, Lars understood the barbarian's character very well. Thus, from the moment they met, he kept provoking the barbarians' nerves, wanting to infuriate them. When the barbarians charged out of those annoying obstacles, he would immediately order the goblins to charge. They would first exhaust the barbarians' stamina, then lead the orc warriors to launch a fatal attack and completely eliminate the last threat. Chapter 262. It had to be said that this psychological warfare was rather effective against the simple-minded barbarians. When exterminating large tribes, all they had to do was set up traps and send people to curse at them, and the barbarians would immediately rush out of their tents with their weapons in hand, not caring whether they were ambushed or not. After a month of fighting, Lars had personally witnessed countless barbarian tribes being exterminated like moths to a flame. Thus, he felt that using the same method on the remaining barbarians was definitely the right choice. In fact, the situation progressed exactly as the orcs had predicted. The agitated Wharton was already showing signs of losing his rationality. However, just as he was about to rush out, he suddenly froze on the spot. His breathing quickened as he struggled for a few minutes. In the end, he forcefully suppressed his anger and raised his arm to signal the barbarian warriors to stay put and not act rashly. Damn it! When did these guys become so patient? Lars narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself in a low voice. His adjutant, Imsh, who was standing at the side, suggested in a low voice, "General, since they only have about 500 people, why don't we let the goblins charge first? Who knows, they might lose control after they start fighting. When that happens, we can personally kill them all." Imsh frowned and hesitated for a moment. In the end, he nodded. "Then we'll do as you say. Let the cannon fodders test the waters." Did you all hear that? The general has already spoken. Hurry up and get those lazy goblins to move. I want to see 2,000 goblins attack in 5 minutes. Imsh yelled at the top of his voice. When the trumpeter heard this, he immediately blew a horn made from a large bullhorn. The low and desolate sound instantly spread across the land. Woo! 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 The orcs living in the barbarian lands had already formed a relatively complete military system. They had a set of musical instruments to transmit orders. The horn was one of them, and the other was a large drum that was more than a meter long. However, the goblins were too large and inconvenient to carry around. That was why the horns became their most common means of communication. The different rhythms of the horns clearly conveyed the order to attack. The great goblins waved their whips and quickly drove the messy goblins out, urging them to attack in goblin language. It was common knowledge that ordinary goblins were short, ugly, despicable, and cowardly intelligent creatures. They might be excellent thieves, robbers, and destroyers, but they would never be qualified warriors. 2,000 goblins were chased out of the formation under the forceful pressure of the earth goblins. They began to move forward unwillingly. Of course, 2,000 was just a rough estimate. It could be 1,800 or 2,500. Anyway, they looked like a mess. Even the earth goblins, who were the military officers, didn't know the exact number. The beastmen didn't care about how many goblins died. It had to be said that as an intelligent race, it was truly pitiful for ordinary goblins to be reduced to this state. They were worse than livestock, cannon fodder among cannon fodders. If not for their terrifying numbers and fertility, they would have gone extinct long ago. Just as the saying went, nature didn't give them strong bodies or intelligence, but instead gave them the tenacious vitality of cockroaches. This was a most appropriate way to describe goblins and kobolds. Seeing the goblins getting closer and closer to him, Wharton, who had been accumulating his anger for a long time, gritted his teeth and muttered like a madman, "I'm going to kill all these bastards, drink their blood, eat their flesh, pull out their tendons, suck their marrow dry." Calm down. I guarantee that the orc called Lars will become a corpse before sunset. Remember, he's not your only enemy. Revenge isn't in a hurry. Conserve your strength. Andre's ethereal voice once again sounded in the young leader's ears, preventing his last shred of rationality from being consumed by the flames of hatred. He still carried out his battle plan strictly. Even the other barbarian warriors suppressed the hatred in their hearts when they saw their leader's reaction. They resisted the urge to charge at the enemy. It was obvious that these voices were created by the rank 0 arcane spell illusory sound. Ever since Chloe had comprehended it from the primal magic energy, Andre hadn't taken long to decipher it by studying the trajectory of the spell. He added it into his spellbook, and it came in handy today. Otherwise, who knew if these impulsive barbarian warriors would suddenly become hot-headed? 200 meters wasn't a long distance. Even the short goblins only took half a minute to cross the distance. They started to climb the obstacles built by the carts, swarming like locusts. Their numbers were so great that it made one's scalp tingle. It had to be known that 10,000 goblins could fill up a standard football field, and 2,000 goblins could fill up a fifth of a football field. Moreover, there was no formation to speak of, so the goblins looked more numerous than they actually were. Fortunately, their battle prowess was as bad as their reputation. Otherwise, they could scare their opponents to death. However, in front of the angry barbarians, these little monsters were nothing. To be precise, they weren't even on the same level. Wharton suddenly waved the battle axe in his right hand, directly cutting the first goblin that charged at him in half. He then grabbed the upper half of the corpse and bit down on its neck. Blood dyed his teeth red, and he let out a bestial roar. Following this indescribable roar, all the barbarian warriors were boiling. The humiliation and anger in their hearts were completely released. They used this cruel and bloody slaughter to prove to the world that they were still brave and skilled warriors. Kill, 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 kill all these trash. Yes, kill them all, and then cut off the heads of those half-beastmen. No one can humiliate the noble barbarians. Let them pay the price in blood. In an instant, the agitated barbarian warriors completely released the wildness in their bodies. They easily tore the 400 goblins that had overturned the carts into pieces. This wasn't an exaggeration, but a real action. These pitiful little monsters often didn't even know what was going on. They only felt a sharp pain in their bodies, and in the next second, they would find that their arms, legs, or lower body had been separated. Blood and organs flowed everywhere, and the pungent smell of blood could be smelled from 200 meters away. Chapter 263. Let alone the ordinary goblins. Even the orcs who were watching the battle were shocked by such a horrifying and bloody scene. Collapse. The ordinary goblins, who were already cowardly to begin with, instantly fell into a boundless panic. They scrambled to retreat, and many unlucky ones who ran too slowly were pushed to the ground by their companions. Following that, they were trampled to death by countless feet. In the blink of an eye, the 200-meter distance was filled with broken corpses. Even though they had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers, they had lost close to a fifth of their forces in just one round of attack. Coupled with their cowardice, it would be strange if they didn't run. One had to know that in a cold weapon battle, the number of deaths an army could sustain was very limited. Once more than 20% of the army was lost, it would be completely destroyed. Even an elite army was not an exception. Even though Orire was a world where supernatural forces ran rampant, and there had been many famous knight groups that had retired from the stage after their entire army had died in battle, those were elite forces with devout beliefs and strong wills. They were definitely not goblins who did not even have a formation and rushed forward in a disorderly manner. The heavy losses caused them to completely lose their courage. Even the whips and curses of the earth goblins could not stop the tide from collapsing. The barbarian warriors from the wilderness had once again used a cruel massacre to prove that they were the strongest race in the forest bordering the borders. This was especially so in the chaotic battle, where they had shown an overwhelming advantage. Andre, who was hiding behind a tree, saw this scene and subconsciously covered his mouth. He forcefully suppressed the things that kept surging up in his stomach and secretly sighed to himself that he had made the right choice. Without a formation, without discipline, without tactics, they could perform so valiantly just based on their physique and courage. How strong would they be if they went through real training and became a phalanx of heavy infantry? Once he thought of the neat formation of barbarian warriors wielding weapons and giant shields, he felt his blood boil, and a burning light appeared in his eyes. Just like the saying went, all men had a hidden desire to conquer everything. The reason why they did not usually show it was because they lacked a very important incentive, and that was power. Andre was now gradually feeling the benefits of power and authority. At the same time, ambition was beginning to take root in his heart. Trash. All of you are trash. It hasn't even been 10 minutes since the start of the attack, and they've already been defeated by a bunch of stray dogs. No one knew if it was because he was angry from embarrassment or because he was venting the fear in his heart, but Adjutant Imsh kicked a goblin that had just returned and cursed loudly. 2,000 ordinary goblins might not be able to defeat 500 battle-hardened barbarians, but they should have no problem taking out 40 to 50 of them. But now, none of the barbarians were seriously injured, let alone dead. The most serious injury was a cut on the arm or thigh, which didn't affect their ability to fight at all. Most importantly, through the short, fierce battle just now, they had re-established their confidence. At the same time, it also made the enemy feel fear, especially the broken corpses and bloody internal organs, which constantly reminded everyone of the consequences of daring to cross over. There was a good saying, when enemies meet on a narrow path, the brave will emerge victorious. In the era of cold weapons, an army with high morale was an extremely difficult enemy to deal with. Apart from paying a huge price to fight, the only way was to cut off the enemy's supplies and slowly waste time until the enemy was so hungry that they couldn't even lift their weapons. Only then would they charge forward and kill them all. However, Aurère's tradition had always been to fight in formation. At most, they would add in a sneak attack. Things like cutting off water and food, fire attacks, and water attacks hadn't been invented yet. Thus, there was only one option left, and that was to bring the entire army forward and use the deaths of a large number of goblins to obtain the final victory. Without any hesitation, the orc General Lars raised his thick arm and extended his index finger to make 2 circles above his head. The 1,000 orcs who were waiting in formation suddenly raised their one-handed axes and began to hit their shields with force, making a series of neat bangs. At the same time, they let out short roars. Even though it sounded primitive and barbaric, it was filled with an aura of violence and power. Roar, 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 roar. With a strong sense of rhythm, the well-equipped half-orcs quickly lined up and formed a relatively thin but very wide square formation. Then, they began to move forward with their shields raised. They didn't move very quickly. Their main goal was to drive all the goblins to the front as cannon fodder. Otherwise, they wouldn't have used such a strange formation. It was clear that these orcs had undergone rather strict military training. They were even more elite than the city guards of Lincoln City. That definitely weren't a primitive orc tribe that lived in the forest at the border. Otherwise, they would be the ones ruling Lincoln City now, not the humans. It had to be said that war scenes in the era of cold weapons were always more shocking than those in the era of hot weapons. For example, the scene in front of them right now. There were more than 10,000 monsters rushing toward them like a tide. That kind of huge psychological pressure was completely different from the whistling of cannons and bullets. The latter could often take away a life in the blink of an eye. Not even a complete corpse could be found. The former, on the other hand, was a face-to-face battle. Their faces and bodies were stained with the blood of their opponents, and the screams were endless. It was a hair-raising feeling. It was a miracle that people could persist in such an environment for a few years without going crazy or becoming perverted. However, in this world with real gods, most soldiers who were in pain and confusion would choose to believe to relieve the pressure. For example, those who guarded the borders of Earth and fought against the barbarians and monsters generally believed in the god of guardians. The priests of the temple would tell you that killing those evil enemies was protecting your home. It was your duty. This kind of killing was not a sin. Instead, you should feel honored. Another example was that mercenaries who burned, killed, and looted mostly believed in the god of war. His doctrine advocated killing and plundering. Similarly, his priests would tell his believers that the strong were born to rule and dominate the weak. Plundering in war wasn't a crime, but a method to weaken the enemy. So, if you killed and robbed to your heart's content, you would be spreading the glory of the great war god. Although it sounded ridiculous, many soldiers didn't even know how to read. They were very simple-minded. They believed whatever the priest said. The whole continent revolved around the beliefs of these gods. Although the barbarians didn't believe in any gods, they believed in the spirits of their ancestors and primitive totems. And because they were isolated from the world for a long time, their beliefs were often firmer. Many barbarians, after coming to the human world and choosing to believe in a new religion, would even give their lives for it. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.